Our universe is full of mysteries. What the heck is star jelly? Why are we missing gravity in the Indian Ocean? What did dinosaurs look like? Some of those mysteries can be solved with careful application of the scientific method, but others remain unsolved to this day, despite plenty of hardworking scientists trying to figure them out. We know a lot about a lot, but there are still enough cold cases out there for this giant compilation, so settle in for about 60 of the biggest open scientific questions around. We have to start this video off with a solid foundation, or maybe we'll start by shaking your whole concept of the ground beneath your feet. Here's Hank with the weirdest stuff geologists still don't understand about Earth.
Geologists love to look at strange rock formations and figure out exactly how they got there. Usually, this is fairly straightforward. Combine a volcanic eruption here with a little bit of erosion there, and boom, you got yourself a really striking cliff. But not all the features or behaviors of this planet are so easy to figure out. Some have kept geologists scratching their heads for decades or even centuries. And there are some mysteries that even modern scientists have not solved. Yet. In terms of high-priority geological mysteries, the ground randomly exploding seems like it should be near the top of the list. And that's exactly what is happening in parts of Siberia. Massive craters have been appearing in the permafrost, around 20 of them so far. They're up to 90 meters in diameter and 70 meters deep, the aftermath of colossal explosions. Now, few people have witnessed the actual exploding, and never from close up, but one village saw 5-meter flames that burned for an hour and a half. Now, geologists do know that these are from some kind of explosive gas building up under pressure, most likely methane. Gas samples from the bottom of one crater were nearly 10% methane, but no one's exactly sure where that gas is coming from, how pockets of it are forming, or where the next one will be. One explanation is this is all the result of melting methane hydrates, which form when methane gas is incorporated into the crystal structure of ice. The methane itself is thought to come from deeper within the Earth. You see, when organic material buried long ago is subjected to extreme heat and pressure underground, it can produce methane, which rises up to the frozen permafrost where it can get trapped in ice. And if this is what's happening, then more explosions are probably on the way. With climate change warming the Arctic, methane hydrates are melting faster. But researchers are still debating the details here. Other studies blame microbes for the methane, and some don't think it's really about methane at all. One study points to highly pressurized carbon dioxide as the cause of the explosions. And this is all critical to figure out, and fairly soon, because satellites have found 7,000 hills that might be ticking time bombs. Until we know what's actually happening, we will not know how many of these are dangerous. What we do know is that these hills form quickly, over a few years. And studying them directly would probably shed some light on things, but they can be under very high pressure, so that's kind of tough. It's like when something is maybe about to explode, a researcher doesn't want to go out there and poke it to take a sample. Because what if you are the next crater? Explosions and impacts are two of the very few things that create near-perfect circles in the Earth, so circular features tend to be worth investigating. Well, it turns out you've been looking at part of a near-perfect circle, at least by Earth standards, every time you look at a map of the world. And once you see this, you will not be able to unsee it. It's called the Nastapoka arc. It's 650 kilometers long and makes up a big section of the Hudson Bay in Canada. Clearly, something big happened here. The first idea was that this is an impact crater, the site of a massive thing from space hitting the Earth. There are plenty of other circles that we know formed this way, like nearby Lake Manicouagan, another circle on maps that you just won't be able to unsee. But when something slams into the Earth, it leaves behind a number of pretty telltale clues. Things like weird rocks thanks to shock metamorphism, where heat and pressure from a sudden impact deforms and even alters the minerals in rocks. Or shatter cones, unique patterns of striations on rocks that only form beneath impacts. And the Nastapoka arc doesn't have either of those. That's left scientists with one other hypothesis, that the curve was once the boundary between two tectonic plates. Essentially, close to 2 billion years ago, two continents may have collided and closed an ancient ocean. And as the plates collided, one was thrust up on top of the other, flexing it into a semicircle. But circular boundaries between plates? aren't common. The idea is that here, as material from one piled up on the other, an unusually massive amount of rock built up in a relatively small area, the center of the circle we see today. The weight of all of that was so much that it pushed the lower plate down in a single spot, creating a semicircular bend in the crust. Now, while that could make sense, other areas where there have been similar plate collisions are not perfect circles. So some geologists still think that this was an impact, perhaps a really ancient one, so the usual evidence has been lost to time. And so we are left waiting for some adventurous geologist to find either clear evidence of an impact or a unique plate collision to close the loop on this very large, very mysterious circle. Now, not every mystery can be seen with the naked eye. A patch of the Indian Ocean is missing gravity, and no one's entirely sure why. Now, it's not that you can go here and float. You couldn't even jump any higher if you were standing on a ship there. These are tiny differences that geophysicists detect with very precise instruments. Studying Earth's gravity at different places allows us to see beneath the surface of our planet. See, higher gravity means that something is more dense down there, and vice versa for lower gravity. Except that Earth scientists are totally stumped by the largest gravity anomaly of them all, a massive spot of low gravity in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It could be that the mantle isn't the same in every spot, and there's a plume of hotter, less dense material down there, but some think it goes all the way down through the planet's mantle, essentially suggesting there's a dent in the mantle. The idea is that since the outer core is liquid, the boundary between it and the mantle can undulate slowly over time, kind of like it has waves. So the anomaly is the trough of one of those waves. Others think there are slabs of old continents sitting down there that plunged under the crust at the bottom of the ocean around the time of the dinosaurs. Researchers are still learning about what happens to tectonic plates after they've sunk beneath the crust. But it turns out they can take hundreds of millions of years to mix back into the mantle. And the hypothesis here is that these subducting slabs bring water down with them. The water can reduce the melting temperature of the rock around it to create buoyant plumes of less dense magma, and those could be responsible for the low gravity at the surface. There's certainly no shortage of ideas, but determining which one is the right one will require some higher quality images of what's going on beneath the seafloor. And that's why geophysicists have stuck a bunch of seismometers in the middle of the ocean. They're hoping the way seismic waves from earthquakes interact with whatever is down there will give them clues to what's really going on. Our next mystery takes us to the small island of Anjouan off the northern coast of Madagascar. See, this island has the wrong type of rock on it, and by that I mean it is an unexpected type of rock. You see, Anjouan is a volcanic island, but on its surface you can find a rock called quartzite, which, frankly, it just should not be there. It's pretty clear how the island itself formed. An undersea hotspot volcano slowly built up rock until it made an island similar to the islands of Hawaii. And this one is relatively young by geologic standards, around 4 million years old. And all of this makes Anjouan the last place you would expect to find quartzite. Now that requires some explanation, but not a lot of explanation, because quartzite begins as a quartz-rich sedimentary rock like sandstone, and that is formed by quartz grains eroding from a continent and then slowly accumulating at the end of a river. The sandstone is then buried and fused into quartzite under heat and high pressure. And that's the mystery here. The quartz shouldn't have eroded from the volcanic rock of the island itself. It must have come from some larger continent. And besides all of that, the quartzite is likely much older than the island itself. They've been dubbed the impossible rocks by the researchers studying them, and their history is still very much an unanswered question. The current hypothesis is that they came from the African continent, possibly when Madagascar broke away, but it's not clear how this would have happened. So the next step for the researchers is to figure out exactly how old the quartzite is and compare it to the age of rocks in East Africa and Madagascar to see if they find a match. One of the most long-standing geologic mysteries is also one of the most seemingly mundane. Mima mounds might not look like much at first. They're just mounds of sediment, most famously found in Washington state, though similar formations exist on every continent except Antarctica. Each can be between 2.5 and 15 meters across and up to 3 meters high. So, they're just not super impressive features. Still, these little bumps have been haunting the dreams of geologists for almost 200 years. We simply don't know how they form. There have been over 50 explanations proposed, everything from earthquakes shaking the sediment to winds building them during droughts to insects slowly constructing them bit by bit. In 1942, scientists proposed that pocket gophers were responsible, and believe it or not, that is still the leading theory to this day. A 1987 study added small bits of iron to the mounds and tracked them using a metal detector, and that showed that when the gophers dug a burrow, they pushed the removed material, including the metal bits, uphill. Then in 2013, a computer model took those results and extrapolated them over hundreds of years, and at least according to the math, these wee gophers could build that kind of mound eventually. The process is predicted to take hundreds of years, an amazing multi-generational project for the little rodents. We still don't know why the gophers would do this, though. After all, it takes more energy to push sediment uphill when you're digging a burrow. Also, a model is far from conclusive proof, so other ideas could end up being right. So what we really need is for someone to take two flat areas of land, stick some gophers in one, and keep gophers out of the other, and then see what happens over about 500 years. You know, just some simple, straightforward science that we'd all be long dead before we got the results of. Our final mystery is that every 26 seconds, like clockwork, the Earth rumbles. Seismometers first heard this strange faint pulse called a microseism in 1961. Since then, it has been detected all over the world, except strangely, not in South America. By comparing the signals at different seismic stations, scientists have triangulated the signal's origin. This leads to two spots. The strongest signal from the 1961 pulse was attributed to the Gulf of Guinea in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Nigeria. The second is in the western Pacific Ocean near Fiji, but that is on the other side of the Earth. It's actually exactly on the opposite side of the world from that first spot. So scientists think that it could be originating in the Gulf of Guinea, and then the seismic waves are traveling across the entire planet and concentrating on the other side. But no one is sure what the ultimate source is, or why it occurs at such regular 26-second intervals. One study suggested it could be related to some part of the volcanic process deep beneath the surface, but that wouldn't explain why it is stronger during storms and overall stronger when it's winter in the southern hemisphere. Instead, those both suggest it has something to do with waves in the ocean. Some experts hypothesize it's simply that the African continental shelf is shaped in such a way that when waves hit it, they rumble through the Earth. A similar, though less impressive, rumble coming from the seas around Sicily was tracked down to ocean waves by comparing seismometers to wave data from buoys in the ocean. So that kind of setup could perhaps shed some light on this 26-second pulse. But the Italian rumble was conveniently close to Mount Etna. That meant researchers were able to repurpose an array of seismometers that was already there to monitor the volcano. Nothing like that exists in the Gulf of Guinea area now, so getting the data needed to support the wave theory won't be so easy. Still, regardless of what's causing them, the microseisms have come in handy. They're so regular that they've been used to sync up the clocks of seismometers around the world. And there you have it, just 6 of the many mysteries of this planet that we have yet to solve. Despite having studied Earth for thousands of years, we still have much to learn.
I can't get over those weird circles. Something must have made them. I don't know if it was meteors or gophers, but perfect circles don't just happen. And those aren't even the weirdest circles on Earth. Ever heard of ball lightning? Olivia can tell you all about it.
If you've got a question about the world, there's no better tool than science for answering it. But sometimes, even science struggles to explain everything. Some phenomena are so rare that scientists don't get the chance to observe them in real time, while others are so common, it's hard to find one thing which explains every occurrence. And some are just head-scratchers that scientists haven't been able to figure out despite decades or even centuries of research. Let's take a look at 7 of the coolest, weirdest mysteries that scientists are still trying to solve. First up is something so common you might have seen it yourself: ball lightning. Surveys show about 5% of people have seen these strange glowing orbs of light, and records of them date back to antiquity. They have the appearance of lightning, but instead of a quick flash, each ball can last from seconds to minutes. Most are no bigger than your head, but the largest can be more than a meter across. Some observers have even reported the orbs entering buildings through windows or traveling along the ground. Outside, ball lightning seems to appear alongside thunderstorms. But during World War II, it was often observed by pilots and even in the engine rooms of submarines. Over the years, scientists have proposed lots of different ideas to explain what's going on. One idea is that when lightning strikes during a thunderstorm, it vaporizes some of the silicon found in everyday soil and releases it into the air. As the vapor condenses into flecks of silicon dust, it picks up an electric charge and clumps together into loose balls. Individual silicon molecules then combine with oxygen from the air to form silicon dioxide, which releases the energy that causes the ball to glow like lightning. And there's some support for this idea, as researchers have succeeded in creating smaller, shorter-lived glowing balls in a lab by vaporizing silicon. But lightning doesn't strike underwater, let alone in a submarine. Another possible explanation for ball lightning is that the electrical energy in a storm creates microwaves, and that, just like in your microwave oven, those waves energize water molecules in the air. Through a process called stimulated emission, air molecules shed that extra energy as a glowing light we see as ball lightning. Stimulated emission might also help explain the observations made inside planes and subs. Those closed environments could trap the energy and enhance the process. It's also possible that what looks the same in those places is actually a different phenomenon than what we see outside. Scientists will still have to be in the right place at the right time to study actual cases to figure out what's going on. Ball lightning might look like lightning without thunder, but what about the opposite? Thunder without lightning. That's what some in the US call a skyquake. In Japan, their name translates to rumbling of the sea, and in Bangladesh, it's barasal guns. Whatever the name, what people hear is a loud, thunder-like boom coming from a perfectly clear sky. They've been reported for centuries across an incredible array of circumstances, which could mean that a bunch of different processes are all producing similar results. In the modern world, some are probably the shockwave produced when a far-off jet goes supersonic. Of course, that doesn't explain skyquakes from before the invention of jets, and even today, supersonic flight is banned around most places people live. Some have suggested small meteors could be the source of far-off sonic booms instead. Since the rocks burn up quickly, they could be visually gone before the noise reaches the ground, and they'd be hard to spot anyways during the daytime. Other scientists think that rumbles heard near a coast might come from giant bubbles of methane released from the ocean floor. The gas molecules are physically trapped within crystallized water, forming substances called clathrates. Occasionally, the strength of these clathrates can fail catastrophically, releasing a bunch of methane all at once. When it reaches the surface, all that gas can create a shockwave, which makes a loud boom, and sometimes even launches a tsunami. Far from the sea, they could be related to their better-known cousin, the earthquake. Shallow, weak earthquakes may not shake the ground enough for us to notice, but the sound they produce could still be loud enough to hear. So next time you hear a rumble in the sky, it could actually be the ground, or the sea, or a plane. All right, let's move on. Skyquakes and ball lightning have remained unsolved for centuries, but there are more recent discoveries so baffling that they earned a spot on this list. Since 2007, astronomers have detected a series of high-energy pulses coming from seemingly random directions in space. They're called fast radio bursts, or FRBs, because each lasts just a few milliseconds. Here's the really weird part. All but one have never been heard from again, so it's probably not ET trying to get in touch. Astronomers have figured out that whatever's producing them is way outside our galaxy, billions of light years from Earth. For them to appear so bright means the source must be astonishingly powerful. Our only hint about what's going on comes from the one source that's ever repeated, and studies suggest it may be one of the universe's most tortured objects. Many experts think it's a neutron star, the dead core of an exploded giant star. And not just any neutron star, but one that's having a really bad day. One hypothesis suggests it's in the midst of being devoured by a nearby black hole. Another claims it's caught in a supernova blast of yet another dying star. Either way, all this trouble is causing it to emit a series of fast radio bursts. The thing is, since no other FRB repeats, we don't know if this tells us anything about what's causing them. Then again, maybe the other sources do repeat, just over a much longer timescale. A decade is pretty short on the cosmic scale, after all. Another cosmic mystery probably isn't coming from space at all. For centuries, people have reported finding star jelly on the ground or in tree branches, especially after a meteor shower. This gooey material seems otherworldly, But one thing we can be sure of is that it's not coming from outer space. Something as delicate as star jelly just wouldn't survive the heat and pressure of entering Earth's atmosphere. It is a good example of how things happening close together can lead scientists astray. Most likely, long ago, some observers noticed star jelly around the time they saw a meteor shower, and the connection just kind of stuck. But if it's not goop from the galaxy, what is it? One clue might come from where it's often found: near bodies of water. Star jelly bears a striking resemblance to the spawning material that contains eggs of reproducing frogs. So in some cases, it might be frog spawn or frog ovaries eaten and then thrown back up by another animal. We're a long way from black holes destroying neutron stars here. There are also no shortage of strange gel-forming creatures, from slime molds and fungi to bacteria and blue-green algae. And at least one case was determined to be simply chemical in nature. A purple gel found in Texas in 1979 turned out to be a cleaning agent from a nearby battery factory. So it may just be that there are way too many strange gelatinous things in this world to attribute star jelly to just one source. Determining the jelly in question every time would mean taking careful samples, finding experts, and maybe even running DNA tests or something. That's a lot of time and money for scientists to spend just to answer, what is that goo? Bacteria are potential culprits in another unexplained natural phenomena: forest rings. These circular patterns are made by trees whose growth has been stunted compared to the rest of the forest. They can range in size from a few meters to a few kilometers and are pretty much only visible from the air. Around 2,000 are known in the world, but scientists estimate that that might just be a quarter of the true number. And unlike crop circles, forest rings aren't created by people, although it's pretty funny to imagine someone slowly poisoning trees for decades in the middle of nowhere. Talk about a long con. In the past, scientists thought they were the result of a harmful fungus spreading out from a single tree, but sampling didn't reveal any clear culprits. More recent ideas have focused not on the trees themselves, but what's below them. Soil samples taken in some rings reveal an unusually high concentration of methane. Other measurements showed the potential for underground metal deposits. Either one can create an excess of negative electric charge and basically turn the ground into one big natural battery. That acidifies the soil and harms tree growth. Bacteria may play an important role, especially when it comes to the methane. Microbes far underground might produce the stuff, while those closer to the surface can consume it as part of the reaction. But that's all mostly speculation at this point. Geologists and biologists have only recently started digging into the mystery, and are now trying to set up their own artificial forest rings to try to find out what's really going on. Unseen geology is also a suspect for one of the world's weirdest light displays. For decades, locals near the Hessdalen Valley of Norway have reported a series of strange floating lights. These so-called Hessdalen lights can be as large as a car and float in place for hours. In the 1980s, they were seen as often as 20 times a week. If you ever see one, don't touch it. Individual lights have been measured to emit as much as 19 kilowatts of power. Because the Hessdalen lights always appear in the same area, scientists have been able to make better measurements of them than many other unexplained phenomena. Even so, there are still a wide range of ideas about what's going on. One is that we're seeing the effects of a Coulomb crystal, which honestly just sounds like something from science fiction. Coulomb crystals can form in plasma, which is basically a form of electrically charged gas. They're not physical in the sense that you could pick one up. Think instead of a kind of force field cage within the gas. If enough charged particles were trapped inside such a crystal, their combined glow could shine brightly. As for why Norway, of all places, some scientists think there is a unique situation where a source of atmospheric dust comes into contact with a natural reservoir of radon gas. Radon is radioactive, and as it decays, it emits radiation that could electrically charge the dust in a way that makes Coulomb crystals more likely. Other researchers think the lights are actually a special case of something we've already mentioned: ball lightning. Instead of a storm, though, the lightning would be thanks to this region's unique geology. Rocks in the valley contain a lot of quartz, which generates an electric field when strained under physical forces like compression. All that excess electricity could launch a lightning ball over and over in the same area, resulting in a beautiful but dangerous light display. One thing that's pretty clear about all these mysteries is that aliens are not the answer, except for maybe this last one. Well, from a certain point of view. The biggest unsolved mystery in geology isn't lights in Norway, but the outside of rocks all over the world. Wherever there's arid conditions, geologists find rocks covered in desert varnish, a dark substance just a few microns thick. Petroglyphs, the rock art of some ancient cultures, were often created by scraping away the varnish to reveal the brighter rock below. One particularly intriguing observation is that although the composition of desert varnish varies, it doesn't seem to relate to what makes up the rock underneath. And scientists can generally detect microbes in this stuff, but that doesn't mean that they're the source of it. Some elements found in the varnish, like manganese, are common microbial waste products. But the real question is whether life is producing the varnish or simply there too. And there's another much more speculative idea, which is kind of fun. Some have proposed that desert varnish might be the most visible sign of the so-called shadow biosphere. That's the idea that there's a whole world of undiscovered microscopic life on Earth that we haven't noticed because it doesn't work how we expect. Imagine life with a totally different chemistry. Would we recognize it? It'd almost be like alien life right here on our own planet. This is an idea rooted more in philosophy than science, but it is an important warning as we begin to look for life beyond Earth. The universe may be full of creatures, but if they work fundamentally different than anything we know, how will we find them? In a way, that's the value of these unsolved mysteries. They force scientists to consider our own well-studied world in new and surprising ways.
Okay, so aliens are rarely the answer to our unsolved mysteries, but that hasn't stopped some people from proposing them as the creators of the enormous petroglyphs called the Nazca lines. Here's Neva to investigate that mystery.
As Spanish colonizers walked across the Peru desert in the 1500s, they stumbled across some peculiar ruts in the ground. These dugout lines extended for kilometers in seemingly random directions. At the time, the Spanish thought the grooves were roads made by an ancient civilization. No one really understood the magnitude or mystery of the lines for hundreds of years. It wasn't until the 1920s, when a Peruvian archaeologist happened to glance down a hillside, that the full picture came into view. The lines formed massive, glorious drawings. There was a monkey more than 100 meters long, a hummingbird that stretched its wings for more than 50 meters, and an array of geometric spirals and other shapes. These drawings came to be known as the Nazca lines, and they've puzzled archaeologists ever since. There have been countless theories about what they mean and why they were created. So today, let's take a historical walk in the desert, from the lines' discovery to the modern research that's helping us interpret them, and all that we still don't know. If you want to explore the Nazca lines, you'll have to venture to an area called the Pampa, an arid plain about 400 kilometers south of Lima. It's here, in an area spanning more than 450 square kilometers, that the Nazca lines take shape. They're a type of landscape art called geoglyphs, and they're stunningly diverse. Some depict things in the natural world, like birds, people, plants, or insects, while others are spirals, zigzags, and wiggles. Recent dating of artifacts found on or near the lines puts them around 2,000 years old. It's amazing that these etchings have stuck around all that time, given that they're literally just lines carved into the dirt. See, the soil in the arid pampas has multiple layers, and if you carve away the reddish iron oxide-filled top layer, you'll reveal a white lime and clay layer underneath. That's all these lines are, and they've lasted for centuries. Partly that's thanks to the dry climate and the wind that sweeps sand out of the grooves, but also the area is now a protected UNESCO heritage site, and there are good reasons to protect it. The Nazca lines bring up so many questions, like who made them? How do you even create something this big? And why? The first time the lines were studied scientifically was in 1927 by a Peruvian archaeologist named Toribio Mejia Hespe. Hespe mapped the geoglyphs and studied other structures along the lines too. He discovered cemeteries which resembled those from the Nazca people, who lived between 200 BCE and 600 CE. Hespe concluded that they made the lines as paths for religious ceremonies, or maybe even as aqueducts. But the Nazca people never left a written record, so he couldn't be certain, and his aqueduct theory became the first of many. With the advent of airplanes in the 1940s, interest in the lines grew. Suddenly, people could view the art from above and marvel at its sheer size and precise shapes. One of the biggest Nazca line enthusiasts and researchers was Maria Reiche, a German-Peruvian mathematician who later became known as the Lady of the Lines. She took over the work of scholar Paul Kosok, who was interested in irrigation and wanted to see if Hespe's aqueduct theory held. When Reiche traveled to the desert with Kosok in 1946, she became obsessed. She lived in a small hut in the desert and cleaned the lines and shoot away people who might disturb them. That obsession yielded a bunch of new information about the lines, including theories of how these ancient figures were made. One key thing that she discovered was that these images weren't free-handed drawings. She and other archaeologists found wooden stakes at the end of the lines, which made them think that the carvers would stick the stakes into the ground and run a cord between them, basically making a ruler that they could trace along. And, of course, Reiche came up with her own ideas of what the lines were for. While walking along the lines one day, her former boss Kosok had noticed that one line pointed directly at the setting sun, and he thought, maybe this is a marker for the winter solstice. Shortly after, Raihei discovered another line that pointed at where the sun would be on the summer solstice, and together they decided that the Nazca lines formed an elaborate celestial calendar. While the straight lines pointed to times of the year, the images could have represented constellations, except many of the lines didn't point to anything significant in the night sky. And a theory that only holds for some of the geoglyphs and not others isn't much of a theory. That meant by the 90s, Raihei's astronomy theory had fallen out of favor with archaeologists. New theories from the 2000s onwards instead focused on religious or cultural interpretations. They started thinking about where the lines were carved, aka the valley floor, making them best viewed from above. But people living 2,000 years ago didn't have airplanes to view the lines, so why make them best visible from so high up? Maybe, archaeologists argued, it was to be viewed by the gods as a form of religious devotion. Problem is, the ground isn't the only place these images have been found. Some have been carved into the hillsides. When archaeologists started studying the hillside geoglyphs, they saw that the images resembled pottery and textiles from another, even older culture called the Paracas, who lived here from 700 BCE to 1 CE, which means that not all of the Nazca lines are made by Nazca people, and the Paracas were geoglyphing before it was cool. And because the images were on the walls of the valley, researchers thought they were meant to convey important cultural concepts to other people, so kind of like an early form of billboards. And there's one image that shows up time and time again: birds, which made archaeologists wonder what kind of birds they were and why the Nazca carved them so often. In 2019, ornithologists and archaeologists teamed up to identify the birds. Weirdly, many of the species weren't local to the desert at all. There were pelicans, parrots, and hermit hummingbirds. Scientists thought that maybe the pelican was a symbol for rain, since migrating seabirds were believed to be a sign that rain was coming and that there'd be a good harvest. Parrots probably lived in the nearby jungle, and they were kept as pets. And maybe the Nazca just thought all these birds were really cool. No, really. Birds also show up in Nazca pottery, and archaeologists have found bird remains, like feathers, at ceremonial sites next to the geoglyphs. So birds held some kind of special significance, but their exact role is still unclear. And in addition to teaming up with scientists from other fields, modern geoglyph researchers have also turned to technology to help them study the lines. One approach they've tried is GIS, or Geographic Information System. That's where you record lots of data points about things like where settlements are, topographic features, or even the Earth's curvature, and layer them on top of each other to study an area. Researchers thought that this approach might reveal some kind of pattern in the lines, or something about how the Nazca people viewed them. Their analysis found that roughly 2/3 of the geoglyphs were placed in a way that they were within sight of other geoglyphs, which made researchers think that any activity happening on one geoglyph, whether that was building it or something else like a ritual, was meant to be seen by other people working on or standing on another geoglyph. And much more recently, archaeologists have employed AI to help them in their studies. In 2024, the technology had helped researchers discover more than 300 new lines in the space of just 6 months. It took around a century to find the first 430 of them, so this was a big deal. Most of these new glyphs were much fainter and smaller than previous ones, and instead of being outlined like a picture, they were hollowed out reliefs. In the study, researchers flew a drone over the Nazca Pampa and took images of the ground. An AI tool then outlined potential geoglyphs, and a human confirmed them. They also mapped where these new images were, and saw that a lot of the figure geoglyphs were spread out and intersected with the geometric and line glyphs, which made them think that people walked along the lines in geometric shapes to view the more artistic, outline style figures. Plus, these lines all seem to converge on a sacred temple and waterway, so maybe this network of lines and pictures served as a pilgrimage route for ancient civilizations. And the relief style geoglyphs were found close to many ancient walking trails, which again supports the idea that these images communicated something to people walking nearby. And those images usually depicted some kind of scene, like people with livestock or human sacrifice, so they could have been conveying information about agriculture or religion. Now, pretty much all the studies we've talked about so far have assumed one major thing, that the Nazca lines on the ground have to be viewed from above. But one research team disagrees. They spent more than 150 days walking 1,500 kilometers of Nazca lines. They focused on a series of lines they call the labyrinth, which makes a long, winding path across the pampa, only to return to where the walker started. It's still in excellent condition, like it had been very well taken care of. It's also narrow, with sharp turns and twists, meaning that if people walked it, they probably walked slowly and in single file. All of which made researchers think the line could have been part of a ceremony, maybe even religious, and maybe not even made to be walked by people at all, but by gods. But even the authors note this is all just speculation at this point, and there are so many other theories we haven't mentioned. That's the difficult and fascinating thing about the Nazca lines. Without written records, it's really hard to know what they all mean and what significance they held. But archaeologists are convinced they are significant and tell us about what life was like in Nazca society, which is why people are now protecting the lines from damage by vandals. The great preservation work that started with Maria Reiche continues to this day.
The Nazca lines depict a lot of birds that might seem a little out of place in Peru. But Peru is close to the equator, and for some mysterious reason, there are just way more species in that part of the world. Here's what we know about that bizarre trend.
Tropical rainforests are known for being super biologically diverse. They're full of different species, from colorful birds and insects to plants and fungi. We haven't even come close to cataloging everything that's there. If you're a biologist heading for the Arctic tundra, though, well, I hope you love lichen. This pattern of lots of biodiversity at the equator, but less as you move towards the poles, is called the latitudinal diversity gradient. It's true for both the northern and southern hemispheres, warm and cold-blooded animals, land and ocean ecosystems, and all up and down the food chain. According to the fossil record, this gradient has existed to some degree since the Paleozoic era around 540 million years ago, when life was first colonizing land. Scientists have proposed a lot of different explanations over the years, but they can be grouped into two main hypotheses. First up is the time and area hypothesis. The main idea is that, on the scale of geologic time, tropical habitats are older and have more land area than temperate and polar habitats, which means there's been more time and space for lots of species to accumulate. In the early Cenozoic era, about 66 million years ago, after the downfall of dinosaurs, a tropical-like climate extended as far north as what's now London. The warm climate of the region around the equator has stayed pretty much undisturbed since then, which has left plenty of time to accumulate diversity. Over lots of generations, organisms in one species can build up random DNA mutations that happen to help them survive better in their environment, like a fur color that helps baby animals hide from predators, or a sweeter nectar that helps a plant attract more pollinators. Eventually, with enough of these helpful traits, called adaptations, one species can split into two, then more, all of them thriving in different ways. Temperate latitudes, on the other hand, dealt with multiple waves of glaciers during the Pleistocene epoch around 2 million years ago, which made survival hard and limited life's ability to get a foothold. In fact, a lot of modern-day temperate species are actually descended from tropical species, which colonized temperate areas as glaciers retreated. The time and area hypothesis gets some support from the fact that there does seem to be a trend of bigger and older ecosystems around the world having more diversity. But there are problems with this idea too. For instance, the fossil record shows that relatively few of today's tropical species actually date back to the beginning of the Cenozoic era. Even in the tropics, some estimates say the average species only sticks around for about 15 million years or so before going extinct. So the latitudinal diversity gradient can't just be the result of tropical ecosystems being stable for a long time. Something else must be going on too. That's where the diversification rate hypothesis comes in. Some scientists think that new species actually arise more quickly and go extinct more slowly in the tropics. Studies from the world of paleontology mostly support the idea that diversification rates are faster in the tropics, but we're not exactly sure how this happens. It's possible that the stable, mild climate allows species to specialize. If they don't have to expend a ton of energy to survive things like extreme weather or lack of nutrients, they can adapt to specialized niches in their environment. Or maybe there's lots of interaction between species, speeding up coevolution, the process where two species affect the course of each other's evolution. When one species has to share its environment with another, they compete to survive. So over lots of generations, both species will keep coming up with new adaptations, and maybe even spin off new species in the process. And then there's the idea that higher temperatures, like those near the equator, actually affect an organism's metabolism. This might speed up the pace of evolution by promoting shorter generation times and faster DNA mutation rates, leading to more organisms with different traits and possibly new species. The details here are still a bit murky, but there are studies showing that controlling for other factors like how big their habitats are
Some tiny organisms called protists evolved faster into more species in tropical waters than in Arctic waters. Any way you look at it, biologists and ecologists have been speculating about this pattern for a very long time. The real story probably involves some combination of these ideas, or something we haven't thought of yet. For now, though, the latitudinal diversity gradient remains one of the great unsolved questions of natural history.
So we still don't know exactly why some places have more animals, but an equally puzzling mystery is why some periods throughout history had fewer animals. Like, extinctions happen, but as Rose will tell you, we still don't know what caused these ones.
Some people might remember a time when one of the biggest mysteries of Earth's history was what killed the dinosaurs. Nowadays, we're pretty confident that dinosaurs were killed by a comet or similar space impactor, but it took many years of research to come to that conclusion. And Earth's history has many more secrets. The dinosaurs weren't the only species that went extinct under mysterious circumstances. There are many extinctions in Earth's history. While some of them only involve one species going extinct, others affect many other species. Each one affects the course of evolutionary history, and the more we understand about them, the more we learn about evolution overall. But big or small, some extinctions remain unsolved. Here are a few and what we'll need to figure out before we can learn the consequences of each one. First up are our close cousins, the Neanderthals, whose extinction set the course of our own history as Homo sapiens. Neanderthals lived in what is now Eurasia until about 35,000 years ago. They eventually died out and were replaced by modern humans, but although we have many theories for why they died out, we don't know for certain. One of the oldest theories for Neanderthal extinction proposes that they were wiped out by Homo sapiens in direct conflict, possibly over resources. Another theory says that Neanderthals could have been wiped out by diseases carried by Homo sapiens when they entered Europe from Africa. Since warmer environments tend to host more diseases than colder environments, modern humans could have had more robust immune systems than Neanderthals, and might have passed illnesses onto them. There's also the idea that Homo sapiens won out over Neanderthals through interbreeding. In fact, many researchers contend that the Neanderthal extinction wasn't really an extinction. They were just absorbed into the human population through interbreeding. But the evidence doesn't support this theory. Some people have a small amount of Neanderthal DNA represented in their genomes, especially modern Europeans and Asians. But it's not really enough to suggest their population simply combined. One of the most interesting theories about what happened to the Neanderthals is, in a weird way, also the saddest. It may have just been bad luck. A study from 2019 suggests that the Neanderthals might have always been on the verge of extinction. They had a small population to begin with, which means that they didn't have a whole lot of genetic diversity. Genetic diversity is important for the overall health of a population. It helps keep their defense against diseases more robust, and tends to water down harmful recessive genes. The study proposed that the size of the Neanderthal population could have meant that they were always on the cusp of extinction. They were just large enough with just enough genetic diversity to keep going for some time. But a few particularly bad years could have been enough to drive them extinct without having to consider the competition with Homo sapiens at all. That said, we still don't know for sure what caused the Neanderthal extinction. It's even possible it was a combination of these and other factors. For example, a small population wouldn't have helped them recover from new diseases brought by migrating humans. The other extinctions on this list at least have proposed explanations, but there is one extinction event that was discovered so recently we still don't have very many theories about it at all. And although only one group of animals were affected, it's likely this extinction will change the way we think about the members of that group that survived. This extinction happened to sharks. In a study published in 2021, researchers looking at fossils in the Pacific Ocean found something dramatic that they hadn't seen before. They found a gap in the fossil record suggesting that 19 million years ago, 90% of all open ocean sharks
sharks died out. This was surprising because sharks are not delicate creatures. Sharks have been around in some form or another for 400 million years. They survived a major climate swing around 56 million years ago, and they've faced reductions in numbers before. After the event that wiped out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, about 30 to 40% of all shark species went extinct. But although that impact also caused the extinction of species all over the world, it actually had a smaller effect on sharks than this new mysterious shark extinction 19 million years ago. And while we still don't know what could have caused it, we do know a few things. But to explain them, we first have to talk a bit about shark biology. Sharks don't have bones the way we do. Their skeletons are made up mostly of cartilage, the lightweight material that makes up your nose, and cartilage doesn't fossilize well. So, to look at sharks in the fossil record, you can look for their teeth or their dermal denticles, the tooth-like structures that make up their scales. Both of these are made of a mineral called bioapatite, which does fossilize well. And because sharks have so many more dermal denticles than they have teeth, it's easier and more efficient to search the fossil record for these. That's what the researchers were doing when they discovered the extinction. They were searching layers of marine sediments for these dermal denticles. Because layers are deposited roughly in chronological order, they can give you a good sense for when things happen. And they found that the fossils declined by about 90% in sediments from 19 million years ago. What's more, there was a sharp contrast between the denticles of species that went extinct and the 10% of species that survived. The shape of the denticles was different between the two groups. The surviving sharks had linear striations on their denticles, while the shark species that died out had denticles in a variety of geometric shapes. Linear striations are what we also see on most sharks today. Geometric-shaped denticles never really came back to the prominence they had before this event. That means that whatever happened to the sharks was selective, affecting sharks with geometric scales more than sharks with linear scales. But we still don't know what could have happened to them, only that it probably wasn't climate change. 19 million years ago was a relatively stable period in Earth's history, all things considered, at least as far as we know. We'll probably have more theories about this in the years to come. The Pleistocene megafauna were large mammals that lived between 1.6 million to 10,000 years ago. Some of their most famous members were the woolly mammoths, giant sloths, and saber-toothed cats. Some megafauna species, like elephants, rhinos, and giraffes, are still around today, but most of them went extinct about 10,000 years ago. There are two competing theories for why the megafauna died out. The first, the overkill theory, states that the megafauna extinction happened because of humans. As humans became better hunters, they started hunting the megafauna and eventually killed off so many of them that the species weren't able to survive. Proponents of this theory point out that megafauna decline on a lot of continents also coincides with the arrival of humans, particularly in North and South America. But opponents argue that there isn't a lot of archaeological evidence that humans actually did this. The other major theory is that climate change caused the extinction. After all, 10,000 years ago is when the last glacial period ended, and things got a little bit toastier. The idea is that megafauna were unable to cope with the changes and died off. Opponents of the theory, however, point out that there were other periods of climate change when megafauna were around, and they were able to weather those. To complicate matters, the evidence is different depending on where in the world you look. While climate change could have affected megafauna populations in North America, some investigations into South American megafauna show that the decline began right around when human hunting technologies in South America were improving. It's possible that the real explanation is a combination of the two, and which was more prominent varies in different parts of the world. When one species goes extinct, even one as significant as the Neanderthals, it's a fairly small event on a planetary scale. When a group of closely related species, like a group of sharks, go extinct at the same time, it's a bit more interesting. An entire category of species, like the megafauna, is a much more significant extinction. But there are extinctions in Earth's history that are even more impactful than that, where extinctions happen across category and species lines. We call these mass extinctions. The Guadalupian extinction is a bit different from others on this list. because we actually know what caused it. But what makes this extinction mysterious is that for decades, scientists kind of overlooked it. That's because this extinction happened just 8 million years before the Permian mass extinction, an apocalyptic event around 252 million years ago that radically reshaped life on Earth. That mass extinction wiped out 95% of marine species and came dangerously close to wiping out all life on Earth. 8 million years is a blip by geologic time standards, so the Guadalupian extinction kind of butts up against this other one. Because of this, scientists didn't even notice the Guadalupian extinction for a long time. There are usually 5 mass extinctions cited in Earth's geologic history, and while the Permian is one of them, the Guadalupian isn't. In 2015, researchers looking at the fossil record in South Africa's Karoo Basin found some of the most significant evidence for the Guadalupian mass extinction. 74 to 80% of the land vertebrate species that they were looking at were wiped out. Since then, further study has shown that 60% of marine species were wiped out during the Guadalupian extinction. This number pales in comparison to the Permian, but the Guadalupian extinction still had a large impact on global biodiversity. This is why some researchers suggest that the Guadalupian should be included in the Big Five mass extinction events, making the Big Five the Big Six. As for the cause, it's thought to be volcanic activity. When the Anjouan traps in southwestern China erupted, the impact was enough to change the chemistry of the ocean, leading to widespread ocean acidification and lack of oxygen. The Guadalupian extinction shows how disruptive, powerful volcanic events can be to life on Earth. And the fact that it went undetected for so long also shows that there are a lot of mysteries left in the geologic record. It's often claimed that we are currently living through another mass extinction, this one caused by humans and their effect on the environment. Understanding the factors that led to species going extinct in the past can help us predict how species might go extinct today. Who knows, we might even learn to spot the warning signs to prevent extinctions from happening in the future.
It's a big deal when entire groups of animals die off. In fact, any large dying event is going to capture people's attention. That's why we're still talking about the lake where hundreds of people died twice. Me? What's the story behind Skeleton Lake? I would like to show you something. It's a tiny lake in the Himalayas, just 40 meters across. This is Rupkund Lake. It is also the gruesome site of an untold number of deaths. The lake is also called Skeleton Lake because around its shores are the remains of hundreds of human skeletons. And while no one knows exactly how those skeletons got there, it's possible that this was the site of not just one enormous tragedy, but two. The presence of the human remains at Rupkund Lake wasn't officially acknowledged until 1942 when a forest officer found them while on an assignment. Now, this site has been heavily disturbed, both by rock slides and by human visitors. So we should say right off the bat that while you might see some grotesque bone sculptures in the photos, those are not actually part of the mystery of Skeleton Lake. Those are the result of hikers and tourists who have messed around with the remains and removed artifacts, which is pretty uncool if I'm being honest. It also makes things really tough for archaeologists who just want to know, where did these people come from and how did they die? For one, while there are a lot of bones around the lake, there isn't a single intact skeleton, which could tell us more about how the individual died. This also means that the skeletons aren't buried or left in place, which could tell archaeologists more about when they died. And since artifacts in the area have been taken by visitors, it's hard for archaeologists to gather more context for what might have brought people to the lake and ultimately to their end. But over the years, there have been a number of theories to explain the remains. In the 1940s, the British thought the skeletons might be the remains of Japanese soldiers, which raised concerns that these skeletons might be signs of an invading force. Another theory was that the remains belonged to traders who had died because of an epidemic or because of the harsh conditions they were traveling through. There has also been a religious explanation, recorded in folk songs sung in the area. Rupkund Lake lies along a pilgrimage route known as the Nanda Devi Rajat Yatra, which is an ancient Hindu tradition that is held in honor of the mountain goddess Nanda Devi every 12 years. As the story goes, a king was performing the pilgrimage to the mountain goddess along with his queen and members of his court. But the celebration of the court members along the pilgrimage angered the gods, who unleashed a heavy hailstorm that killed everyone in the group. We said earlier that this mystery is a really tough one for archaeologists to unravel, but luckily, tough mysteries are sort of what archaeologists are all about. And to untangle this puzzle, they've turned to a number of techniques, including inspecting the skeletal remains and artifacts they can access. In a 2023 paper published in the journal Heritage, scientists reported that by looking at the skulls, they could see that these remains come from people who ranged from adolescents to elderly in age. They were also able to see that the skulls reflected nutritional deficiencies like anemia, which can happen when people don't have enough fresh food or sunlight. But the researchers noted that these issues probably would not have killed the victims found at the lake. And in a 2019 study in the journal Nature Communications, scientists found that the skeletons seemed to be a mix of men and women, making it unlikely that they were soldiers. In fact, they specifically found the remains of elderly women among the group. Such a person would be more likely to climb the mountain on a pilgrimage than for any other reason. And some of the skulls showed compression fractures, leading the researchers to speculate that they could have been the result of a hailstorm. According to the scientists, Rupkund Lake regularly gets hit by hailstones that are the size of cricket balls, which is terrifying. So, a pilgrimage subjected to deadly hail? That sounds a lot like the story of the ancient king and his court who angered the mountain goddess. But the more scientists have looked at these remains, the more complicated their story has gotten. Using radiocarbon dating, scientists found that some of the remains date back to around 800 CE. But the king who was likely the target of the mountain goddess's wrath is thought to have lived around 1150 CE, which would have been a few centuries too late. And in the 2019 Nature Communications study, scientists dug deeper into the bones. They literally drilled into the bones and extracted DNA from the bone powder. The DNA from ancient remains is often degraded, so the team looked for small genetic variations called single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs. These SNPs can be a valuable tool for identifying different human populations. They also used a technique called mitochondrial haplogroup determination. The DNA in our mitochondria is inherited from our mothers, making it a genetic record of our ancestry through the maternal line. By combining their studies of skeletal SNPs and mitochondrial haplogroup determination, the researchers found that the skeletons weren't just one big group of people that had died there in one single giant catastrophe. They were actually representative of at least 3 genetically distinct groups that spanned around 1,000 years. The scientists also looked at carbon and nitrogen isotopes in the bones. The plants and animals we consume have different carbon and nitrogen isotopes in them thanks to a number of factors, like the reactions they use to survive, the presence of fertilizers, and aspects of their environment. So looking at the isotopes in our bones is a bit like looking back through your photo reel to remember what you ate when you went on vacation, except more comprehensive. The researchers found that the skeletons showed a range of different diets, which supports the idea that there was more than one group that died at Rupkund Lake. So where were these skeletons from? The first was the group of skeletons that had been dated using radiocarbon dating to 800 CE. That group had South Asian-related ancestry, and while they may not have been the exact group documented in local folk songs, they could still have been on a pilgrimage that faced tragic circumstances. One single skeleton showed signs of potential East Asian-related ancestry. But the most surprising group dated to around the 19th century. The genetic results showed that they were likely of Eastern Mediterranean origin, and their diet suggested that they had lived inland. Researchers don't know yet what might have killed them. They don't even know why this group was in the Himalayas. Maybe they were there for the same reasons that so many other people have been drawn to the area, for the Nanda Devi Rajat Yatra. But a Hindu pilgrimage doesn't seem like a typical journey only for 19th century Mediterraneans. Maybe one day researchers will find a story documented somewhere about a large group of travelers that went missing, and they'll be able to link it to these remains. Or they might explore other tools that will find other hidden details buried in these bones. But until then, the story behind how Rupkund Lake has attracted so much tragedy as to become Skeleton Lake will remain one of those mysteries that just becomes more mysterious as we try to untangle it. We still don't know if the lake had anything to do with the terrifying number of skeletons nearby, but bodies of water hold plenty of their own mysteries. We're about to share 7 unsolved mysteries about the deep ocean.
Humans have done a pretty good job of exploring the Earth thus far, climbing mountains and crossing continents and planting our flags all over the place in the name of science. But one part of the world that has remained pretty mysterious to us also happens to cover more than 70% of its surface. The ocean. Yes, we have sailed across it plenty of times and drilled for oil in it and managed to create reality shows about fishing in it, but from glowing oceans to massive deep-sea creatures and underwater ecosystems with thousands of undiscovered, basically alien species, we still have a lot to learn about it. Number 1. What's the ocean floor like? Fact is, we still don't know exactly what the ocean floor looks like in most places. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says that 95% of the ocean's bottom remains unseen by humans. As a result, we have a way better picture of the surfaces of other planets than we do of most of the seafloor. In 2014, a team of scientists created a map of the seafloor using data from satellites equipped with special sensors called radar altimeters. These instruments can precisely measure the distance from the satellite to the surface of the ocean below. Essentially, any large mountains or canyons on the ocean floor have a slight gravitational effect on the ocean's surface, creating bumps and dips respectively. These variations are of course too subtle to be detected by human eyes, but they can be measured by these ultra-precise satellite altimeters, and after adjusting for the effect of waves and tides, tell scientists what's on the seafloor. This map spans the entire ocean floor, which is awesome, and we're all glad that it exists, but it only has a resolution of about 5 kilometers, which is pretty low. By comparison, most of the surface of Mars, Venus, and the Moon have been mapped to resolutions of 100 meters or less. So if we want to know what's going on down there and really explore the ocean, detecting life, specific mineral formations, or wrecks, we're gonna need a better map. Number 2, what's under the seafloor? Okay, you're probably thinking that you know what's down there. Rock, yes, but not just rock. In 2015, scientists reported that they had drilled down about 2.5 kilometers below the seafloor off the coast of Japan and discovered living microbes. They were only about 10 to 10,000 microorganisms in a cubic centimeter of sediment that they studied, compared to like billions that you'd find in the same amount of dirt from your garden. But still, there's life down there, even in the intense heat and pressure many kilometers below where the ocean stops. And the genomes of these undersea microbes showed that they were actually more similar to the kinds you'd find in forest soil rather than the ones in seafloor sediments. So it's possible that these microbes are descendants of terrestrial ones from 20 million years ago that just adapted when their habitat began to get buried way beneath the ocean. So who knows what other kinds of life could exist in deep marine sediments, or what they could tell us about what life on Earth used to be like. Number 3. Brine pools. We've all seen lakes and rivers on land, but what about lakes that are underwater? Sounds a little bit unreal, like maybe it's from the SpongeBob episode, but these features actually exist. Pockets of seawater that have a different composition than the surrounding ocean because they're super salty. They're known as brine pools, and they seem to have formed when layers of salt from evaporated oceans millions of years ago got buried under layers of sediment. Seawater can reach these deposits and mix with the salt, forming a dense brine that flows out of the seafloor, sometimes filled with oils or methane gas. Some brine pools, like those found deep in the Gulf of Mexico, are actually 4 times as salty as the ocean water around it. And the brine is so dense that submersibles can even float on top of it, like a boat on a lake. All this salt makes brine pools lethal to larger animals, but colonies of halophilic or salt-loving microorganisms can flourish there, usually in much higher concentrations than the nearby normal seawater. Some pools are even lined with mussels that have symbiotic bacteria in their gills, which use the methane in the brine to make energy for the mussels. But there's a ton it that we don't know about these weird underwater salt lakes, like how brine pools can be so different from each other, and why some have mussels and others don't, and even how many there are. Number 4. Milky seas. Also known as mareal, this is a phenomenon in which thousands of square kilometers of the ocean surface glow a brilliant whitish blue. It lasts for such a short time, and there have been so few recorded sightings that these glowing seas were thought to be a myth made up by crazy sailors. Until 2005, when a group of researchers was studying satellite pictures of a swath of the Indian Ocean from 1995. These pictures showed an area of about 15,000 kilometers square, around the size of Connecticut, glowing for 3 nights. It was the first scientific evidence of the phenomenon, but the glowing waters are still not very well understood. Some have suggested that the glow is caused by a mass of tiny dinoflagellates called Noctiluca scintillans, known as sea sparkles for the way they glow when disturbed. These protists are what cause the picturesque glittering waves along coastlines in some parts of the world. But the 2005 study showed that it was unlikely, if not impossible, that the short-lived glowing of dinoflagellates was what scientists had been seeing from space. The prevailing theory these days is that milky seas are caused by massive colonies of bioluminescent bacteria that are growing on top of an algal bloom. But we are still not sure how or why these ephemeral masses of bacteria gather, glow, and disappear. Number 5, the 52 Hertz whale. You'd think we would know a lot about whales. I mean, they're big, and we have their skeletons, and we can observe their migratory patterns. But one thing we still have a lot more to learn about is their songs, from why some whales make them to how an animal without vocal cords or lips manages to make song-like sounds. And then there's this question: what whale is producing the 52 Hertz song? And why? This whale song was first noted by a technician on December 7th, 1992 in the Northeast Pacific Ocean. It sounded like a blue whale, but blue whale cries are usually somewhere between 15 and 20 hertz in pitch, so blue whales in the Pacific typically sound like this. But this whale song, played at the same speed, sounded like this. This high-pitched noise seemed to be unique to one animal, a whale that became known as 52 blue. This raises a lot of questions, and we have to know more about whales to be able to answer some of them, like why does this one whale sound different, and can others even hear it, and if they can hear it, do they understand? Some people latched onto the idea that 52 blue is a lonely whale crying out to others that might not hear it or wouldn't call back. But several scientists have rejected this lonely narrative and think that other whales may be able to understand its call, even if they can't make that call themselves. Also, 52 blue seems to migrate independently from any other whales, but its migratory patterns do look kinda like those of blue whales. Scientists have been tracking it up and down the North Pacific from Alaska to Mexico for years now. So some researchers think it might have some malformation that changed how it sings, or maybe it's even a hybrid between a blue whale and another species. Whether or not it's a lonely whale, 52 blue is an oddity that people seem to love. Number 6. Upsweep. Now, ocean sounds are practically their own field of study. NOAA has been monitoring acoustics in the ocean for decades now. Instead of microphones, which are used to collect sound in air, NOAA uses hydrophones to record underwater sounds. Mostly these hydrophones are used to listen to the ambient sound of the ocean, to see how humans might interfere with it, and to listen for things like earthquakes and whale calls. And sometimes they record things that are hard to explain, at least for a while. In 1997, for example, there was what was known as the bloop, an extremely loud, low-frequency sound heard by hydrophones some 5,000 kilometers apart. Oceanographers recently determined that it was the result of an ice quake, the cracking and collapse of glaciers into the ocean, in this case on the coast of Antarctica. But there's another mysterious sound from the ocean, known as upsweep. Recorded in August 1991, it sounds like a repeating boop that picks up at the end, sweeping up, kinda like the red alert sound effect you hear on spaceships in sci-fi movies. But instead of trying to describe it, I can just play it for you. Since 1991, this sound has been heard regularly in the Pacific Ocean, and it seems to be seasonal, usually becoming more common in spring and fall. Researchers have tracked the sound to a part of the Pacific that has lots of volcanic and seismic activity, which seem to be important clues. But according to NOAA, the origin of the sound is unresolved. Number 7. Why are deep-sea creatures so huge? From the kraken to sea dragons, all of our favorite mythical sea monsters are gigantic. The fact is, in real life, many deep-sea creatures are unusually huge. This phenomenon is called deep-sea gigantism. But what drives it is, you guessed it, unknown. In the deep sea, and especially near the polar oceans, some animals seem to get really huge, like colossal squids, giant isopods, and Japanese spider crabs. Scientists aren't sure why, but they do have some guesses. There's Bergman's rule, for example, which suggests that temperature may influence gigantism. This might be because larger animals have less surface area relative to volume, so they radiate less heat based on their mass and stay warmer in colder climates. And then there's Kleiber's law, which states that more massive animals generally have lower metabolic rates and therefore need less high-quality food to survive. Still, other theories suggest that gigantism may help organisms resist increased pressure in the deep sea. But we don't really have conclusive biological reasons why these giant creatures exist. So the ocean is just full of mysteries, maybe because it's so huge and dark and deep. But just so you know, we're not hyping you. We're not saying that these 7 topics are things that science can't explain. Instead, you should just think of them as reminders of how much we still have to learn about the ocean.
Halfway through this giant compilation of unsolved mysteries, it's nice to hear a reminder that things aren't unsolvable just because they've gone unsolved so far. After all, we keep gathering new evidence about mysteries as old as life on Earth. The thing is, sometimes the new evidence only makes things more mysterious, and as Stefan will tell you, that's how the story of the first multicellular life on Earth is going.
One of the things I think is really cool about studying paleontology is how much it's like a detective story. Figuring out the past is often all about clues, logical deductions, and timelines. And like any good detective story, sometimes there's a twist. A new piece of evidence that flips the entire thing and forces us to ask, what's really going on here? And case in paleontological point, about 575 million years ago, there was a massive boom in animal life, and for decades, we've thought that the trigger was a whole bunch of extra oxygen that appeared right beforehand. But in today's episode, we'll explain why that timeline might be backwards and how paleontological detectives piece that together. So it's 575 million years ago, and the Earth has just thawed from a massive ice age. Down in the deep bottom of the oceans, large, complex, multicellular life is first appearing in a big way. Life had existed on Earth before this, but for the most part, it had been small, unicellular things. Think like bacteria and algae, with the occasional bigger splotch of a critter. But suddenly, the fossil record just blooms, with things like feathery-looking rangeomorphs, odd little disc-shaped fellows, and what may be early sponges or coral-like cnidarians like Heutia. And some of these guys could be big, almost 2 meters long. This proliferation is called the Avalon explosion. And while there would undoubtedly be even larger and more spectacular life forms to come, you can think of this time period as kind of like the Earth's proof of concept for ecosystems full of big, complex life. But as for what caused this bloom, that's where a bit of detective work comes in. And one of the major clues for the cause of all of this is called the Shurram excursion, which kind of sounds like the title of a mystery book. But rather than a bestseller, the Shurram excursion was actually a massive worldwide swing in carbon isotopes recorded in rocks dating to right around the same time as this Avalon explosion. And one of the hypotheses to explain the Shurram excursion is changes in the Earth's carbon cycle, which could have been brought on by the sudden appearance of a lot of extra oxygen in the deep ocean. The idea is that all that extra oxygen would have chemically reacted with and released organic carbon stored in the deep ocean, think dead algae and stuff, which would have then been spread around the world and showed up in rocks, like those in the Shurram excursion. But scientists don't know exactly what would have caused this hypothetical increase in oxygen. If the Shurram excursion was due to extra oxygen in the deep ocean, it would seem to support the theory that the mysterious explosion of life during that period was connected. And animals need oxygen to live, so if there's more oxygen in the deep ocean, you could have more animals down there too. But here's the twist. A 2023 paper suggests that the isotopes, and by extension the biodiversity bloom, happened without any oxygen increase, which goes against what researchers have thought for decades. And they came to this conclusion by going back to the scene of the crime, so to speak. They looked at the rocks in Oman, called the Shurram Formation, that were the original evidence for the Shurram excursion. They examined not just carbon, but also 2 other elements, iron and thallium. Taking samples of the rocks, they used X-ray fluorescence and mass spectrometry, which are, in short, ways to determine what's in a sample by bombarding it with X-rays and seeing how it glows, or by comparing a particle's masses and charges respectively. And they concluded that, based on the specific types of iron and thallium they found in the samples, that those rocks could have only formed in oxygen-poor water, not the oxygen-rich water that people had assumed was around during that time. But wait. If it was oxygen poor, then that means the excursion happened before any big oxygen increase. And if the animals happened at the same time as the excursion, then that means they also came before. It upsets the whole timeline. So that means, if this is right, that multicellular life was able to develop just fine with way less oxygen than we thought would have been required. It means that the conditions which first gave the world multicellular organisms were way harsher and more demanding of those early living things than we ever gave them credit for, and that these creatures came about not because of the conditions of the world they lived in, but in spite of them. Now, to be clear, this is just one line of new evidence suggesting that oxygen isn't the culprit. Other papers argue that there's still plenty of room for our friend O2 in this story, which means the real answer to this investigative puzzle is we don't know. It's still a mystery to be solved. Maybe this is a red herring, or maybe this is the clue that'll end up shining a new light on the whole case. But it does raise a lot of questions about other assumptions. Why would multicellular life thrive in such harsh conditions? If oxygen wasn't important, then what was? We don't really have the answers yet, but rest assured, paleo detectives are on the case.
While we're talking about ancient life, it's time to dig into the mysteries of the dinos. A lot of them have to do with what they looked like. I mean, that's the most important puzzle to solve. We need some updated kids' toys. Here's how far researchers have gotten on questions like, why did an herbivore have giant claws, and did dinosaurs have penises?
We can learn some things about dinosaurs from their fossils, from bones to tracks to poop, but knowing how they behaved is a real challenge because we can't, reanimate those rocks and watch them hunt and eat and mate. Paleontologists use a few main methods to try to figure out dinosaur behavior or determine what a given structure was used for in life. One is through direct fossil evidence, like a snake preserved in the act of eating dinosaur hatchlings. Another is through comparison with extant or living animals. Do they have giant claws like the ones we see in certain dinosaurs, and how are those features used today? And a third way is by reconstructing a dinosaur's skeleton using computer models and studying what that skeleton could do without breaking its joints. And yet none of these methods are perfect, so paleontologists still have a lot to learn about even the most famous dinosaurs. So here are 5 mysteries they're still trying to work out. Spinosaurus is the largest predatory dinosaur ever found, bigger even than T-Rex. Our image of Spinosaurus has changed over the years, but now paleontologists generally believe it hunted in the water. What we don't know is the function of the huge sail on its back. Spine sails have evolved a few times independently of one another, most famously in animals like Dimetrodon long before the dinosaurs. And given how flashy and eye-catching they are, it's frustrating to not know what they did. One hypothesis is that Spinosaurus's sail was just that, flashy and eye-catching. It would likely be visible from a distance, and it might be appealing to potential mates, intimidating to foes, or both. There are some other guesses that aren't really in favor among scientists, like that it helped regulate body temperature or supported a camel-like hump of fat. But these are hard to rule out completely. In a 2016 article in Geological magazine, though, a group of German paleontologists threw another hypothesis on the pile. The sail of Spinosaurus, they say, resembles the sail of a swimming predator alive today, the sailfish. Sailfish herd schools of smaller fish into tight groups using the sail for stability, basically as leverage to push off the water, and they use their long bills to injure their prey and snap them up. So the authors suggest that Spinosaurus could have used its sail and long, narrow head in a similar way. But without further biomechanical studies to tell us whether this dinosaur's sail was strong enough to do that sort of thing, we can't say for sure. Plus, it could have had multiple functions. If a sturdy sail helps a Spinosaurus catch prey more efficiently, that could be pretty attractive to a mate. The diamond-shaped bony plates along the back of a Stegosaurus are one of the most iconic bits of dino decoration. Every 4-year-old can spot them, and paleontologists have yet to agree on what they were for. Like the spine sail, a standard hypothesis is that the plates were used to help Stegosaurus manage its body heat. However, even though this idea made its way into textbooks, it's never been universally accepted. Some scientists have argued that channels preserved in some Stegosaurus plate fossils are a network of blood vessels. They think those vessels were ideal for distributing heat when the dinosaurs needed to cool down, a lot like the coils in a radiator. But others say that even if the plates had blood vessels, and even if they did radiate body heat sometimes, that's not necessarily what they evolved to do. Sexual display is also a classic idea, sort of a catch-all to say, we don't know what this thing did, but maybe it looked real nice to other stegosaurs. A sort of a paleontological shrug. That doesn't invalidate the attracting mates idea, it's just very hard to prove. And indeed, in a lot of animals that exist today, the most ridiculous features tend to not be useful except in attracting mates. But in addition to that, some paleontologists think that display structures may have helped members of the same species stick together, what's called the species recognition hypothesis. There were plenty of closely related species of plate-backed dinos within the genus Stegosaurus, so distinctive plates could have helped different species recognize each other and stay together in a group. Other paleontologists have problems with this hypothesis. For one thing, it seems like it would mostly have helped species that lived in the same geographical area, but the fossil record doesn't reflect different stegosaurs living in the same area and having wildly different plate and spike patterns. Plus, there aren't any known extant animals that seem to do this, including those feathery dinosaurs we know as birds. So even though we can all agree stegosaurs look very cool, we're not really close to resolving this debate. As dinosaurs go, Therizinosaurus is strange. It's an enormous theropod, a relative of the famous bipedal carnivores like T-Rex and Velociraptor. But paleontologists think it was a pot-bellied plant eater. The thing is, no one has ever found anything close to a complete skeleton of Therizinosaurus. All we have are some fragments of its hind limbs and its forelimbs. Its huge, wacky forelimbs, sporting over half a meter long claws. For comparison, T-Rex's whole arms were only around a meter. You would think that having arms made of knives would point to carnivory, but even though we don't have very much of Therizinosaurus to go on, we do have some clues that say otherwise. Usually, looking at fossilized teeth is the easiest way to tell what an organism ate. Predatory dinosaurs like T-Rex had teeth suited for piercing, while plant eaters often had leaf-shaped teeth that were built for shredding plant matter. Although lots of relatives of Therizinosaurus have been discovered in recent years, mostly in the US, China, and Mongolia, all of the fossils are about as fragmentary. But when there's a tooth, it is of the leaf-shaped variety. That points to this particular group evolving to eat plants. So that still leaves paleontologists with a puzzle. What are this dinosaur's claws for? In a study published in 2014 in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B, the author looked at the biomechanics of these massive claws. He tested three main hypotheses: that the claws were for piercing or grabbing prey, that they were for digging in the dirt like the giant claws of an anteater, or that they were for grabbing plant matter. Using computer reconstructions of claw specimens, he found that the outsides of the claws weren't up to the stress of digging, and the tips weren't great for piercing. But the insides of the claws were well suited to grasping vegetation and pulling it closer. Its relatives might have used their claws in other ways, but Therizinosaurus probably at least used them to get at plants to munch on. With all that said, we don't know if these big, adorable representations are accurate without a more complete skeleton. I, for one, hope they find one soon. Fossils don't come with timestamps. There's no way to know whether they were formed during the day or the night, and dinosaurs' sleeping habits are a mystery. That's why a 2011 study in the journal Science made a splash when California-based researchers claimed that Velociraptor was a night owl. They did this by studying the eyes of Velociraptor, along with other dinosaurs and pterosaurs. Eyes are far too soft to fossilize most of the time, but many archosaurs, the group that includes dinosaurs, crocodiles, and birds, have a bony ring supporting their squishy eyeballs. It's called a scleral ring, and it closely matches the shape of the eye. And because it's bone, it's sometimes preserved in fossils. The authors of the paper developed a model that connected the scleral ring size of archosaurs with their eye size and habits, then tested it against living animals with known eye sizes and known behaviors. A scleral ring with a wider inner diameter relative to the size of the eye socket can let in more light, and it's found more often in nocturnal creatures. Then they applied that model to 33 extinct dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and other reptiles. They predicted that many flyers like Archaeopteryx and pterosaurs were sunshine lovers, and many predators, including Velociraptor, were likely active at night. However, another US-based group published a response to the original paper in Science, calling into question the math behind their methods and model. They agreed with the basic idea that scleral rings correspond to general eye size, but basically they argued that there's too much overlap between diurnal, nocturnal, and in-between species anatomy to draw definite conclusions. The original team fired back a response defending and clarifying their methods, but it looks like they might be arguing for a while. Many extant animals hunt at night, dawn, and dusk, so it would make sense for some dinosaurs to have done the same. To know if any did it for sure and which ones, we'll need more evidence. Finally, a favorite topic of speculation among paleontologists is how dinosaurs did sex, because of course it is. One of the most obvious questions is how they positioned themselves, because they have stiff tails, spikes, plates, and other ouchy parts to think about, not to mention their massive size. We've yet to find a fossil that preserved dinosaurs mid-copulation, but we also don't have any impressions of their equipment. Unlike mammals, archosaurs have a single opening used for urination, defecation, and transferring genetic material. It's called a cloaca. So to figure out what dinosaurs had, paleontologists are comparing extinct animals to extant ones using a method known as phylogenetic bracketing. Phylogenetic bracketing involves looking at both sides of the family tree to infer what's in the middle. In this case, crocodiles are on one side and birds are on the other, so the logic goes, if crocs and birds have a feature in common, the non-bird dinosaurs may have shared it with them. This method isn't perfect, since animals lose features or gain new ones over evolutionary time, but it's considered the most likely outcome if researchers don't have any other evidence. And in the case of the dinosaurs' junk, phylogenetic bracketing is all we have. Crocodilians have a structure that emerges from the cloaca to deliver semen, a penis basically, although it's not related to the mammalian version. It's basically a stiff bit of tissue with a groove for semen to travel down, and it's just tucked within the cloaca until it's time to mate. Most birds don't have any kind of phallus, they just smush their cloacas together, but ducks and geese famously do, and some big flightless birds like emus have penis-like structures too. They're also slightly unlike mammalian penises, with a groove for semen, and they are inflated using lymph instead of blood. In fact, many of the oldest evolutionary lines of birds have penises, which suggests most birds lost theirs over evolutionary time. So if crocodiles have them and birds used to, we can hypothesize that dinosaurs did have some sort of phallus-like structure. But we can only guess until we find some sort of fossil, which I am excited to see. Paleontologists have to get pretty creative to interpret dusty fossils and imagine vibrant living creatures that had to find mates and decide when to sleep. Given that, it's pretty amazing we know as much as we do about the behavior of dinosaurs and their weird adaptations to life in the Mesozoic.
It's no wonder we still haven't solved a lot of these ancient mysteries. It's not like we were around back then, but that doesn't keep ambitious scientists from trying to solve even earlier ones, like how and when plate tectonics started. So let's dig into that and a few of Earth's other great unsolved mysteries.
Earth is our home, and we like to think of it as pretty well understood. But really, we're still learning a lot about it. From plate tectonics and continents to the time the Mediterranean Sea disappeared, here are 6 mysteries about our planet we're still trying to solve. First, there's the question of how and when plate tectonics started. The Earth's crust and very tip-top of the mantle are divided into floating tectonic plates, which are constantly moving, pushing against, and slipping under each other. And from this process, we get phenomena like earthquakes, volcanoes, and moving continents. Understanding plate tectonics is fundamental to understanding Earth. In fact, you could even say it's the bedrock of geology. But even after more than 50 years, nobody can pin down how and when this whole deal started. Part of the reason is because there's very little physical evidence left from the early Earth. And what is left is kind of up for interpretation. So 2 scientists looking at the same sample might come to 2 completely different conclusions. One way we've investigated this, though, is by using mineral samples like ophiolites to try to nail down a start date for this cycle. These are fragments of ocean crust preserved in continental crust, and they could only have formed if plates were already colliding or sliding across each other. So if we find them in rocks of a certain age, it could be evidence plate tectonics had started by then. Some of the oldest ophiolites we found are 3.8 billion years old, which would suggest that plate tectonics was active in some form early on. But other suggested dates range from almost immediately in the Earth's life cycle, over 4 billion years ago, to less than 1 billion years ago. So that's quite a range. Meanwhile, scientists are also looking into this by creating and testing computer models. A 2015 study, for instance, used models to investigate mantle plumes, immense upwellings of magma from deep within the Earth. And it found that 1 or more ancient plumes would have had enough force to crack the early Earth's crust and kickstart the tectonic cycle, which would have been amazing to watch from a spaceship. not on Earth. Figuring out this conundrum is important because it wouldn't just help us understand life on our planet, but in the universe too. Because plate tectonics hasn't just shaped how our planet looks. It's also done things like keep the atmosphere stable by adding and removing carbon dioxide. That helps keep our planet from tipping into either freezing or boiling. And because of this, some scientists think that these plates might be necessary for life to develop and thrive on other planets as well. No matter how things kicked off, plate tectonics started slowly rearranging the face of the Earth. And that leads us to our second mystery. Some 250 to 350 million years ago, the continents got squished together into one giant landmass called Pangaea. It was what scientists called a supercontinent. But it wasn't the Earth's first, and it won't be the last. And like plate tectonics, more generally, this repeat supercontinent cycle has had a profound effect on our planet's crust, atmosphere, oceans, and life. The breakup of Pangaea might have triggered a global change in climate, for example, as fresh tectonic rifts released CO2 into the atmosphere. But explaining why this cycle exists and what drives it is trickier. Again, a lot of the physical evidence is up for interpretation. And also, it's possible that no two supercontinents formed for exactly the same reason. Case in point, one of these possible forces scientists are looking at to explain supercontinent formation is called extroversion. And it's nothing like the personality trait. In it, you start with a supercontinent. Then a new ocean forms in the middle and pushes the other plates away. Eventually, the ocean grows so much that the plates circle around the globe and end up shoved into one area. But as a 2008 paper pointed out, while extroversion alone might explain some supercontinents, it struggles to explain every episode of supercontinent formation, including Pangaea. Instead, that might have been caused by extroversion's opposite, introversion. In that case, the cycle starts the same, with a new ocean opening up. But then the process stops and reverses, drawing the other plates back together again like a giant drain. One test that scientists can use to try to figure out what drove certain episodes is by testing the age of marine deposits from tectonic plate collision zones. This can tell you whether they came from old oceanic crust or young oceanic crust, which would be characteristic of extroversion and introversion respectively. Another thing that might be the result of plate tectonics is the Messinian salinity crisis. About 6 million years ago, the Mediterranean got cut off from the ocean as something closed the Strait of Gibraltar. The Mediterranean naturally loses more water to evaporation than it gets from rivers, so without new water from the strait, it began to dry up. And while exactly how much it dried up is controversial, we know it left kilometer-thick salt deposits behind and had major local effects on climate and fauna. But why did that closure happen? Just looking at the rock itself is tricky, because it's hard to pinpoint the age of the layers. There aren't many fossils, for example, which normally serve as signposts. So we've had to turn to other methods, like looking at volcanic rocks. In 2003, scientists comparing rocks in the area from different time periods noticed a shift in the ratio of elements found in rocks, which they think indicates a change in the mantle. They propose that around the time of the crisis, a tectonic plate shifted, allowing hot mantle material to push up, lifting the land around the Strait of Gibraltar out of the sea and closing off the gateway. Eventually, though, the crisis passed and the Mediterranean started filling up again. Although exactly how that happened is another head-scratcher. And of course, this whole idea is just a hypothesis, so as always, more research is needed. Volcanoes regularly bring magma to the surface, reshaping and creating new land. Most of the time, this is only important in small areas or for short periods of time. Like sometimes a powerful eruption might destroy an island or temporarily affect the world climate. But more massive eruptions, known as flood basalts, can occur. They can cover more than 1 million square kilometers with magma thousands of meters thick. And some of them, like the Siberian and Deccan traps, have been implicated in mass extinctions. So naturally, we want to know why they happened. One conventionally cited cause might be mantle plumes, those giant upwellings of material from near the Earth's core. Another might be delamination, where part of the lithosphere, that's the crust and upper mantle, falls away from the tectonic plate it was attached to. But we don't have definite answers about how or why these things might happen. After all, they're events that happened deep within the Earth millions of years ago. But there are ways scientists can try to decipher why flood basalts occurred. In 2006, for instance, a paper studied the age and makeup of xenoliths, which are rocks stuck inside other igneous rocks. They were looking at xenoliths that would have formed in the mantle just underneath the crust. And they were looking in a layer of rock that would have been deposited soon after a flood basalt event. What they were working off of is that if delamination was actually the cause of the flood, the loss of that chunk of lithosphere should also mean the loss of those xenoliths sitting just inside or below it. So the scientists could look at the age of any xenolith they do find. And if there was delamination, there should be no mantle xenoliths older than that event. Looking at these rocks, it does appear that delamination happened at some point under China, for instance, but not for other events, like ones in South Africa. So the science continues. The Earth's axis of rotation naturally drifts and wobbles over time. In the 20th century, for instance, it seems to have moved about 10 centimeters per year, in part because of a rebound effect from the last ice age. We can map this polar wander via satellite, and understanding it is important for climate modeling. But the Earth's wobble might not always happen at such a steady and stately pace. In fact, there's evidence there have been major shifts. Around 174 to 157 million years ago, for example, East Asia went through a drastic change from wet seasonal to extremely arid. And this was devastating for animals living there. There have been some explanations for this before, but in 2019, a paper suggested this shift was due to polar wander. If that's the case, it would mean the Earth essentially twisted, sending the area that's now China 2,800 kilometers south. Like today's minor wobbles, these major twists would be tied to some kind of redistribution of Earth's mass, from things like impacts or glaciers. The excess mass gets flung, so to speak, toward the equator along with the Earth's crust and mantle. It's just what physics says will happen to a spinning sphere if it becomes unbalanced. That said, it's really hard to pin down exactly where and when these shifts happen. One technique we can use is paleomagnetism. When magma cools, it takes on different magnetic signatures based on where it is in the Earth's magnetic field. So if we see a series of rocks undergoing a quick, drastic change in their signatures, it might be a sign the area they were in moved very quickly. That said, the rocks can be an imperfect record, since later bumps and squeezes can change that signature, which means, again, it's hard to say anything definitive. Alternatively, for more recent episodes, it's been suggested that we can use volcanic hotspots like the one underneath Hawaii. Because the crust is only floating on top of the mantle, it's technically possible that the crust shifted while the mantle stayed about the same. And because those hotspots are features in the mantle rather than the crust, we can use them to track how the crust has moved. Finally, one of the very well-established facts in geology is that the Earth's core is very hot. But the question is, how hot? Those specifics would help illuminate a ton about how the Earth works, like how the magnetic field is generated, how the planet formed, and even how we could predict earthquakes. Figuring out that temperature is tricky, though, because we can't just drill down there with thermometers. So we have to get creative. One thing scientists are doing is studying how iron acts under high pressures and temperatures in diamond anvil cell experiments. In these experiments, scientists measure what happens when small amounts of a sample are heated and squished between two diamond-tipped pushers. The idea is to put iron in one of these anvils, then squeeze and heat it until it's the same density as the Earth's core. A density we already know thanks to other measurements. When you reach that right density, you can check what the iron's temperature is, and that should give us the temperature of the core. Using this method, a 2013 experiment revised the estimate for the melting temperature of iron at the inner core boundary from about 4,800 degrees Celsius to about 5,900 degrees, which is about as hot as the surface of the sun. It doesn't look like there's been any super huge shakeups in that number since then. So maybe this is a mystery we're putting to rest. That said, that's the thing about mysteries. It only takes one new study to open up the door again. Earth is our home, but it's a home built by forces and processes, many of which are invisible, long gone, or mind-bogglingly complex. Often, all three. So our planet is not just set dressing. It itself is one of the great mysteries of science, too.
If Earth's greatest unsolved mysteries got your mind churning, just wait until you hear about the universe's unsolved mysteries. Like, there's a whole kind of matter that makes up about 23% of the universe, and we don't know what it is. Here's an intro to dark matter.
The universe has a bunch of stuff in it. It's got the planets, the stars, the galaxies, and gas and dust, all the regular space stuff you hear about. But a lot of what makes up the universe cannot be seen with a telescope because it doesn't emit or absorb light. It's called dark matter, and surprise, surprise, It's very mysterious. Since dark matter can't be detected, you might wonder, why do we even think that it exists? Well, we can infer its existence from things that we can detect, like light and other forms of radiation, plus all the things that they bounce off of that lets us see them. The first clues to dark matter's existence came in the 1930s, when astronomers realized that they could weigh a faraway galaxy by clocking the rate at which all of the massive objects inside it moved in relation to each other. This gravitational action could tell you how much mass there was in the galaxy. The galaxies appeared to be weighing a lot more than the stuff inside of them would account for. There simply weren't enough stars and other stuff to make the galaxies act the way that they were acting. There had to be something massive, yet undetectable inside of them that explained how they moved and also what was keeping them hanging together. It took decades of brilliant people and amazing instruments like the Hubble Space Telescope to rethink the whole enchilada, but today, physicists figure that dark matter accounts for about 23% of the known universe. So now comes the part where we tell you what dark matter is, what it's made of, and tell you all about it. Unfortunately, nobody knows. We're pretty sure that it's not just regular everyday matter, also called baryonic matter, like protons and neutrons. The most commonly held view is that it's made up of exotic subatomic particles that were created a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a second after the Big Bang, and it might be all around us. We could be swimming in dark matter, and we would have no idea because its particles don't interact with ordinary matter, so we can't detect it. Now, what's got astrophysicists all hot and bothered these days is the possibility that the newly discovered Higgs boson might hold the key to dark matter. The Higgs, remember, is a particle that's predicted by the Standard Model of Particle Physics, the theory that helps us understand the behavior of matter in the universe. Verifying the existence of the Higgs is a huge deal because it's an indicator of a larger phenomenon known as the Higgs field, an invisible field that basically gives particles mass when they interact with it. So, even though dark matter and ordinary matter probably can't interact with each other, some scientists think that the Higgs might be able to kind of translate for us. Since it gives mass to ordinary particles in the universe, it probably would also be giving mass to whatever makes up dark matter, seeing as dark matter is also massive. So unlocking the secrets of the Higgs could end up making dark matter a lot less mysterious. In the meantime, scientists are doing their darndest to actually detect dark matter. Most of these experiments are happening deep underground because if we're surrounded by this stuff, which we probably are, then it's likely passing right through our planet all the time.
If dark matter is a mystery, it's also no surprise that dark energy is a mystery too. Like, maybe the biggest mystery in the universe. Here's why.
As you are probably aware, our universe is huge, but what you might not be aware of is that it's getting huger all the time. And for that, we have dark energy, the most mysterious force ever, to blame/thank. So the universe is expanding. Not only that, but the farther away you go in any direction, the faster everything's flying apart from everything else. Now, we've known since 1929 that the universe was expanding. That's when astronomer Edwin Hubble, you recognize that name, noticed that light from other galaxies was shifted toward the red end of the spectrum, indicating that they were flying away from us. But it wasn't until 1998 that astronomers observing distant supernova discovered that the universe was actually expanding at an ever-increasing rate the farther away we look. Now, this is really counterintuitive given everything we know about the Big Bang and our old friend gravity. As you've no doubt heard, the Big Bang theory suggests that the universe came from a single, unfathomably dense point, and the crazy amount of energy generated by the Big Bang caused everything, space, time, matter, everything, to come into being and radiate out from that point. And for about 3.5 billion years after the Big Bang, things went along about as you'd expect. The expansion of the universe gradually slowed as gravity tried to pull all the matter in the universe back together. But then, something weird happened. Another force began to overpower the pull of gravity between all the matter and made the expansion of the universe accelerate. Spoiler alert, that's what we call dark energy, thought to make up more than 70% of the energy in the whole universe. But as bizarre as this is, as physics go, it isn't totally out of left field because Albert Einstein actually predicted it in 1917 when he was first trying to apply his new theory of general relativity to the structure of space and time. Einstein found that his equations didn't work for a static universe, so he threw in a hypothetical repulsive force that he called the cosmological constant in order to fix his math problem. This constant was basically a certain density of energy that was theorized to permeate the universe. The funny thing is, once Edwin Hubble discovered that the universe wasn't static and was in fact expanding, Einstein thought that the cosmological constant was no longer necessary and he scrapped it. But now the concept is back on the table as a way of explaining dark energy. So what is now known as the cosmological constant theory assumes that dark energy is just a fundamental property of space. In keeping with Einstein's thinking, it proposes that empty space is not nothing. It has properties like anything else. One property of empty space is that it can grow. More of it can be made. Another property is that it can possess its own energy. And if dark energy is a property of space, as more space comes into existence, more dark energy would appear. Another theory that some are pushing is called quintessence, named after the fifth element of Greek philosophers. Quintessence suggests that dark energy is a new type of energy that is temporarily filling space, but it might eventually fade away just as it arose. And there are other ideas. Some think that dark energy fills space with virtual particles that only briefly exist as matter and then disappear, while others are ready to entertain that Einstein's theory of gravity is incorrect, which could be a kind of game changer, as you'd imagine. So the bottom line is, whatever dark energy is, and whatever it's doing it like crazy. But everybody wants to know more about dark energy, so hopefully we'll have more information soon.
I really wish Einstein had finished that project and figured out what dark energy really is. For now, it remains unknown, and it has plenty of company as one of the greatest mysteries of physics. Here's Michael with 4 more of them.
Physicists have always been interested in some of the biggest science questions ever, like, where did the world come from? Or, what is stuff? So far, searching for answers has led to incredible discoveries, from the Big Bang to the Standard Model of particle physics. But these discoveries aren't the end of the story, because they raise even more questions. We've talked about 2 of the biggest unresolved questions a lot on SciShow and SciShow Space: dark matter and dark energy. So here are 4 of the other biggest unsolved mysteries of fundamental physics. First, here's a question. Why can we remember the past, but not the future? What makes the 2 different? It might sound silly, but the laws of physics tell us that this is a legitimate question. Basically, the fundamental laws of physics are equations that can tell you how things change over time. They can tell you what happens to a system next, given its current state, but they also work just as well at telling you what happened to that system in the past. Like, you can use the same information to figure out where a rolling ball will end up, and where it was a few seconds ago. In other words, the laws of physics work equally well running the clock backwards and forwards. But that's not how we experience everyday life. We only experience time moving in one direction, forwards. And the reason why is entropy. Entropy is a physics concept that tracks how much disorder there is in a system. And in our everyday world, it always increases. Systems tend to get more disordered and messy as time moves on. That's because everyday things have huge numbers of parts interacting with each other, so there's always more ways for things to become disordered than to spontaneously order themselves. Like, there are just way more ways for globs of milk to scatter through your coffee than there are for all the milk to gather in one spot, so you never see your coffee run in reverse and unmix itself. So really, what we experience as time moving forward is just the universe flowing from low to high entropy. And that's where a big, unanswered question comes in. Where did all of this start? And why? Like, we know from cosmological evidence that the whole universe had a very low entropy beginning, the Big Bang. There, everything was squished into a tidy, small sphere. But why was the universe in that state? Why was entropy lower in the past? It should be much more likely for the universe to be in the maximum entropy state, the most disordered state possible, to the point where entropy couldn't rise anymore, and the flow of time wouldn't be possible. But instead, the universe started as highly ordered, which is such an unlikely thing to happen by chance that scientists are looking for an explanation. So basically, to a physicist, why can't you unmix coffee and milk, and why did the Big Bang happen the way it did, turn out to be kind of the same question. In terms of proposed solutions to this, well, they verge into philosophy. Some people say that the question doesn't even need an explanation. And even the suggestions we do have sound pretty wild. Like, one idea is that our entire observable universe is just a little low-entropy bubble embedded in a much bigger, more chaotic, ever-inflating hole. But that's highly speculative and, at least for now, probably impossible to test. Speaking of inflation, that's actually its own unsolved mystery of physics. About 40 years ago, cosmologists came up with an idea called inflation to explain many of the problems with the Big Bang model of cosmology. So now the question is, did inflation happen? And if so, what exactly is it? The Big Bang theory says that the universe started off small and dense and then expanded outward. The theory of inflation is an add-on to that, and it says that in the first tiny fraction of a second that the universe existed, it expanded at a much faster rate. Like, it inflated by a factor of 1 followed by 26 zeros in a time span of 0. And then 30 zeros, 1 seconds. Talk about an early growth spurt. Most cosmologists believe inflation is real because it helps solve a few problems with the Big Bang model, and because they've seen most of its predicted effects in telescopes. The Big Bang model predicts that on the largest possible scales, we should see notable temperature variations and some warping when we look deep into space. Except, the universe appears really homogeneous and doesn't appear to have any overall curvature. Everywhere we look, things are roughly the same, with similar distributions of things like galaxies and similar ambient temperatures. We also don't see any evidence of space being warped on the largest scales, the way we see space warping around a black hole. And for all of that, inflation would explain why. If that extreme growth phase happened, then the full universe is wildly bigger than what we can see. And if the part of the universe that we can see is really just a tiny fraction of the whole, it makes sense that it appears smooth and flat. It's like how the Earth is clearly curved and detailed when seen from the International Space Station, but if you zoom in on a small part of it, it can look flat and featureless. So really, inflation kind of says that our observable patch of the universe is the Nebraska of the wider cosmos. But not every scientist is convinced that this idea is right. Like, the idea of inflation also implies that there's a particle called the inflaton, but that isn't predicted by any physics theories, and we have no direct evidence for it. So some physicists have proposed alternatives to inflation, like the very abstract conformal cyclic cosmology model of Nobel laureate Roger Penrose, which says that there was an expanding universe before the Big Bang. The good news is, the next generation of telescopes and gravitational wave detectors may be able to identify telltale signals from inflation, and even tell us what type of inflation, if any, is real. So of all of the problems in this episode, this is the one we have the best chance of tackling soon. Next up is the fine-tuning problem, and it's about constants. Whenever scientists settle on physics theories, they always find numbers that appear as just brute facts. Like, take Einstein's E equals mc squared, which relates to mass and energy. The c stands for the speed of light, and we know that's about 300,000 kilometers per second. But we don't know why. And there are loads of constants like that, from an electron's mass to gravity's strength. By one count, there are 26 constants that are fundamental. They can't be explained as coming from a deeper theory, but just are. And that raises all kinds of questions. Like, if those numbers are truly random, there's quite the coincidence going on here, because if some of these numbers were even slightly different, life as we know it wouldn't be able to exist. For instance, if gravity was a bit stronger or weaker, stars wouldn't be able to produce the variety and abundance of elements needed for life to function. And there are other weird coincidences too, like that fundamental particles are less massive than it seems like they should be, given the forces acting on them. So what's going on here? It could be that there's a more fundamental theory we don't know yet that explains why these constants have the values they do, or maybe the answer lies elsewhere. Some researchers even speculate that there's a kind of multiverse where constants have different values and where physics works differently. Others take this idea even further and suggest that we only exist because we're in the universe suited to life. That last one is an extremely speculative idea though, and since it's not something we could ever really test and provide evidence for, it also borders on unscientific. The truth is, physicists just don't know what's going on here. To learn more, we need to understand the fundamentals of physics a lot better. And that brings us to our final problem, the holy grail of the foundations of physics. The quest for a theory of everything. The question is this: is there one theory that can explain all of physics? Because right now, we have two, and they're kind of completely incompatible with each other. Physicists think there should be a theory of everything because lots of physics breakthroughs over the last 2 centuries have been some kind of unification. Like, Isaac Newton showed that the thing that makes apples fall from trees is the same thing that makes planets orbit the sun. Gravity. He demonstrated that 2 different phenomena in 2 different situations were governed by the same underlying principle. And that spirit of unification has also linked space and time, electricity and magnetism, and more. In fact, over the years, physicists have unified their theories down to 2 fundamental ones: Einstein's general relativity, or GR, and quantum field theory, or QFT. GR describes how gravity works, and QFT describes the other 3 fundamental forces: electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. And the incredible thing is, everything in the entire universe can be explained using one or more of these 4 forces: even if it's super hard to do in practice. But general relativity and quantum field theory actually contradict each other at times, with results that can clash over things like extremely short distances or high energies. So the goal here is to find a deeper underlying structure that looks like QFT in some circumstances and like GR in others. Basically, one structure that explains both, and by extension, explains all of physics. That's a theory of everything. And there are lots of contenders. Each of them propose that there's one fundamental thing that the universe is made of, and everything manifests from that. The most popular idea is called string theory, and it says everything is made from one-dimensional vibrating strings, and all forces and types of matter come from their different vibrations. That said, we could spend hours talking about string theory or other ideas like loop quantum gravity, but there's zero evidence for any of these theories, and no prospects of that changing anytime soon. To find evidence for a theory of everything, we'd need to find where quantum field theory and general relativity break down. In other words, where they give the wrong predictions. That would hint at something deeper in physics. Except, those theories are too good, so it's super difficult to find evidence against them. We do get rare hints, like the muon G-2 experiment or dark energy in cosmology, which currently doesn't have a good explanation in either theory. But they're basically drops of water in a vast desert. Then again, finding a theory of everything was never going to be an easy task. A structure like that would also include dark matter, those hypothetical inflatons, and answers to things like the fine-tuning problem. So, it's like asking to solve all of fundamental physics at once. Overall, there's a theme running through all these problems. For each of them, physicists use insights from the study of the smallest things in the universe and the largest things. They need to know about particle physics and cosmology. And there are loads more unsolved problems we could have talked about where that's the case too. It's a sign of how progress in physics is always interdisciplinary, and how the path forward is so long and daunting that we can only chart it by working together.
I should have known that this compilation would send us all into an existential crisis, but I didn't expect that milk in coffee would be the thing to put us over the edge. I guess now that we've gone off the deep end, there's nowhere left to go but SciShow space.
Who doesn't love the moon? Without it, we wouldn't have romantic moonlit strolls or the ebb and flow of the tides. Worst of all, there wouldn't be werewolf stories. But even though it's our closest neighbor, there's still a lot we don't know about the moon. So let's talk about 3 of the most intriguing moon mysteries: its past magnetic field, the lunar sunrise, and what could be hidden inside its craters. Now, Earth's magnetic field is kind of a big deal. It helps us navigate, it deflects the sun's solar wind. Without it, we would be constantly barraged with charged particles, skin cancer would skyrocket, and the ozone layer would be toast. See, the Earth's outer core is a molten metallic fluid that contains electric charge. Those charges circulate around and create a magnetic field. Scientists call this the dynamo effect. For the longest time, we thought that the moon couldn't have had a magnetic field, but then Apollo astronauts brought home a bunch of moon rocks, and lots of them were magnetic. After analyzing these rocks and doing some computer simulations, we now think that the moon has a molten outer core and used to have its own magnetic field 4 billion years ago. What's more, it seems like the moon's magnetic field could have been even stronger than the Earth's and stuck around for way longer than we thought possible, for around 1 billion years. How? Well, that's the big mystery, but scientists have a few ideas. The moon used to be closer to the Earth than it is now, so maybe the moon wobbled or precessed so much back in the early days that its molten fluids started circulating. Or maybe the moon was pelted with so many asteroids it forced the fluids to slosh around. But one of the most promising ideas has to do with the internal layers of the moon blending. Thanks to the pull of the Earth's gravity, the molten core of the mantle might have rotated on different axes. If these layers weren't perfectly spherical, the molten fluids would have mixed around. As the Earth and moon moved apart, the gravitational pull weakened, and the angle between the axes of rotation would have decreased. No circulating fluids means no magnetic fields. But these are still hypotheses, and we need more modeling, especially from scientists who specialize in magnetic dynamos, to see how likely they are. Magnetism isn't the only mystery uncovered by Apollo astronauts. When they visited the moon, they saw a glow before the sun rose over the lunar horizon. The beauty of a sunrise might seem normal to us on Earth, but the moon has an incredibly thin atmosphere, which means fewer gases to scatter light. These astronauts saw a lunar sunrise with 3 parts: a low glow on the horizon, a glow that arced higher, and rays of light. Researchers think the horizon glow is dust being lit up, like when light shines into your bedroom and you see see how badly you need to vacuum. The arcing glow is probably coronal and zodiacal light, sunlight scattering off of comet and asteroid dust in the inner solar system. Sometimes we see it here on Earth too. But those rays? We don't know. Our best guess is that the sun's radiation could be ionizing moon dust, and the charged dust particles might be repelling each other into the lunar sky. When sunlight hits those dust streams, hello rays. Understanding the rays could possibly be important for future moon colonies because charged dust wouldn't exactly be friendly to lots of electronic equipment. NASA wanted to solve this mystery with the LADEE mission in 2013 and 2014, but the spacecraft didn't find evidence of mysterious rays or dust fountains. So for now, all we can do is guess. Our third mystery isn't in the sky, but hidden deep inside the moon's craters. Craters are sheltered and cooler than the surface, so there's a lot we could find, like water ice, different kinds of rocks, or even possibly signs of past life. See, the early solar system was downright violent. Around 4 billion years ago, when the Earth and Moon were young and being pelted with asteroids, they would have swapped a lot of rock. This might have been when life was first forming on Earth. It wasn't very flashy life, we're talking about single-celled prokaryotes, but what they lacked in looks, they made up for in toughness. Earth had a lot of volcanic activity and an atmosphere that would be toxic to most life today. Most scientists consider this a long shot, but if any of these microbes ended up on a chunk of Earth that crashed into the moon, they might have been buried in a crater. All the rocks on Earth this old have been destroyed or reshaped, so we don't have any records of this period on our planet. The moon's craters, though, could give us a glimpse of that period of our history, and even let astrobiologists know where they might find life on other planets and moons. We won't know for sure until we go digging for samples, either with robots or with good old-fashioned shovels. Any volunteers?
Turns out there's a lot we don't know about our moon. And we still haven't mentioned one of the moon's biggest mysteries, why it's two-faced. Yep, we have a video about that too.
In 1959, humanity learned that the giant gray orb hanging in our sky is two-faced. The near side of the moon, the one facing us, has a thin crust covered with large frozen lava seas called Maria. Meanwhile, the far side looks completely different. It has a much thicker crust and almost no Maria. But over 6 decades later, we still haven't managed to pin down why. To solve this mystery, scientists have come up with some pretty cool hypotheses. From radioactivity to one moon eating another, here are a few potential reasons why our natural satellite looks so strange. For a thing that happens on a microscopic level, radioactivity can have some pretty huge effects, and not just in a supervillain origin story kind of way. Meet Procellarium creep. Or just creep. It's a terrain that's found only on the near side of the moon, and it's defined by high concentrations of potassium, because in chemistry a K stands for potassium, rare earth elements, and phosphorus. Some of that potassium is radioactive, but creep also contains a substantial amount of thorium and uranium, which are a little more famous for being unstable little atoms. And if you pack a bunch of radioactivity into one patch of rock, you can get some interesting effects. For example, creep can lower the melting point of the material around it. It's not quite the same mechanism, but it accomplishes the same effect as throwing salt on an icy sidewalk. Combine this drop in melting point with the fact that radioactive elements also release heat as they decay, and it means the moon's creep could have helped keep some nearby rock molten. And after that molten rock bubbled up and out of a volcano or flowed onto the surface after a big space rock punched through the crust, it could solidify into Maria. Since creep is only on the moon's near side, that could explain why almost all of its Maria are there too. But why is creep only on the near side? And why is the crust on that side so much thinner? Well, back when the moon was young, its insides had these giant currents of churning rock known as convection currents. Warmer rock near the core rose up toward the surface, cooling as it went, then started sinking and warming back up. Rinse and repeat. The same thing is happening inside the Earth right now. But sometimes, and it can happen for no apparent reason, these convection currents can go lopsided and produce something called tilted convection. Some scientists hypothesize that this could have happened to our baby moon, and however the tilt got started, the wonky convection currents may have shifted themselves to match the moon's orientation relative to Earth. See, the reason why we have this consistent view of the moon is because it's tidally locked. It's spinning at just the right speed to keep one side pointed our way at all times. And this locking happened pretty early on in the moon's history, so the near side was kept hot by a new molten Earth blasting a bunch of heat towards it, while the far side got to cool down. That temperature difference flowing from near side to far side could have shifted the lopsided convection currents to match. And because they're lopsided, the currents would have started dragging material away from the hot near side, where it was easier for rocks to stay molten, over to the cooler far side where some of them could solidify. Meanwhile, the stuff that didn't solidify as easily, including potassium, rare earth metals, and phosphorus, made up the leftovers that could form the crust on the near side. So tilted convection could be one way that the moon ended up with a thin, creepy crust on one side and a thicker, creepless crust on the opposite. Underneath that solid crust, there was a cooling but still molten mantle. So on the near side, a meteorite could have punched right through the thin crust and caused magma to bubble up and create Maria. Meanwhile, if a meteorite hit the far side's thick, tough crust, it wouldn't make it through. You'd just get craters, and the far side definitely has plenty of those. But even without tilted convection on the inside of the moon, the temperature difference between the near side and far side could have been enough to make our moon two-faced. Astronomers have another hypothesis that looks at how the asymmetry grew from a baby moon's atmosphere, which was filled with vaporized rock. It was that hot. We're pretty sure the moon was made about 4.5 billion years ago when a not quite so finished Earth had a cosmic collision with another protoplanet. So basically all of the moon's rocky bits started off as a hot liquidy blob until they cooled down. But some bits were hot enough to hover around that blob as a gas. And over time, some of this gas would make its way over to the cooler far side, condense into rocky rain, and eventually build up a solid, thick crust. Different minerals have different temperatures where they become cool enough to condense, so stuff chock full of aluminum and calcium was more likely to rain down onto the far side. Meanwhile, the elements in creep tend to stay vaporized at lower temperatures, so as with the tilted convection hypothesis, they end up as the leftovers forming the near side's crust. But maybe the moon looks like it does because it ate a smaller moon? Scientists are pretty sure that at least 3 bodies collapsed out of the debris cloud created by Earth's hit and run: the Earth and at least 2 moons of different sizes. And it's also likely these 2 moons crashed into each other to make the one we know and love today. Most of the research investigating this hypothesis has the smaller moon smash into the larger one at high speed. But in 2011, one team proposed it could have been a slow crash, where the smaller moon just sort of blooped into the other. Well, it's technically called accretion of a companion, but bloop is just more fun to say. This blooping would have deposited a bunch of new material onto one side of the moon, where it would have cooled, hardened, and become a thick crust. That side wasn't necessarily the far side at the time, but it created such a wonky distribution of mass that over many years, the gravitational interactions with the Earth would have caused it to settle into becoming the moon's super thick backside. But wait, there's more. The slow crash would also have pushed whatever didn't solidify on the far side toward the near side, including all the creep. We've been trying to figure out why the moon is the way it is for a long time, and there are even more hypotheses than the ones we've covered here. And one of the biggest hurdles is getting our hands on actual lunar samples. We have some, but not nearly enough to really dig in and answer all of the questions that we have. But we are in luck. Humans are set to head back to the moon as part of NASA's Artemis program, and they will bring back a plethora of new samples in the coming years. Moon rocks for everyone. Someday we'll solve the mystery of the moon's two-faced nature, and in the meantime, we can look up and admire the one that it keeps turned toward us. And in my opinion, that's definitely its good side.
Now, I need to know if there was more blooping in the rest of the solar system, and to answer that question, we have to explore beyond our own little corner of the universe. Here are 5 things we still don't know about the solar system.
In the grand scheme of things, we haven't been at the space exploration game very long, but we've already learned a ton about the solar system. We've sent probes to planets and asteroids and comets. We know what they look like, what they're made of, their temperatures, atmospheres, and so much more. But you know what's even more amazing? What we don't know. The truth is, there's still a lot we don't understand about our little corner of the universe. So let's look at just a few unsolved mysteries of the solar system. First off, the sun's magnetic field. Magnetic fields everywhere are created by the movement of charged particles. On Earth, for example, the flow of charged particles deep inside the outer core of our planet generates the magnetic field that makes your compass point north and protects us from dangerous solar radiation. Now we know that the sun has a magnetic field too. Maybe that's not surprising. After all, the sun's made of plasma, a kind of gas in which electrons and ions have separated and are free to move around, a recipe for a magnetic field. But we still don't know exactly how it works or where it forms. Does it start near the solar surface or deep inside the sun? How do the different layers affect each other? Getting to the bottom of this matters because it'll help us understand everything from solar flares to the northern lights to the radiation that astronauts will have to deal with while on the way to Mars. Plus, it could help us predict what the magnetic fields of other stars might be like. But above all, unlocking the secrets of the sun's magnetism will help us figure out why our star is so inconsistent. The sun follows an 11-year cycle. At the peak of this cycle, the sun is brighter and there are more solar flares and sunspots. We call this peak the solar maximum. But what's interesting is the way the sun's magnetic field changes during the cycle. The lines of its magnetic field get more and more messy as it nears the solar maximum, and then a series of explosions, known as coronal mass ejections, smooth it out again. The best we can tell, the field lines start out running straight from pole to pole like they do on Earth, but then, because of the sun spinning, they get wrapped around it like cotton candy. Eventually, these stretched and pulled field lines snap like a rubber band, producing explosions and calming the field back down to where it started. But all of this is based on what we can observe on the surface of the sun. We can't figure out how these phenomena are created by what's happening beneath the surface. Maybe they're caused by forces between the outer layers of the sun that are churning in convection currents like pots of hot water, and the parts below them that aren't. Maybe it's more about the motion in the convection currents themselves. We still have a long way to go before we'll understand where exactly the field originates. To get our answers, we'll need to look much deeper. Now, a little farther out from the sun, the stormy planet Venus. Venus has always been a bit puzzling. It's been described as Earth's twin. It's a roughly similar size, and it's well inside the sun's so-called habitable zone, where liquid water could be a thing. But it turns out, not so much. In many ways, Venus is more like our evil twin. It's a planet of unrelenting storms, raging at 300 kilometers an hour, and a runaway greenhouse effect that's given it an average temperature of 462 degrees Celsius. That is hot enough to melt lead. So why is it so different from Earth, and what got that greenhouse effect started? Well, we know what's causing the greenhouse effect today. The atmosphere is 95% carbon dioxide. That's a powerful greenhouse gas, the same gas that's the main cause of climate change on Earth. When you consider that the Earth's atmosphere only has 0.04% CO2, you can see why 95% might be a problem. The question is, why does Venus have so much? Scientists think that Venus was once a lot like the Earth, with liquid water and not so much CO2. But at some point, it got warm enough that the water evaporated, and since water vapor is a powerful greenhouse gas too, this just made the heating worse. Eventually, it got hot enough that carbon that had been trapped in rocks was released, which ended up filling the atmosphere with CO2. The million-dollar question is, what got the heating started in the first place? Was it because the planet had a little too much CO2 to start with? Was it maybe a tad too close to the sun? Or could it have been because of some catastrophic event? It's anybody's guess. Despite all the questions we have about Venus, we've only sent 3 missions there, so we have a lot more exploring to do. In future missions, we could study its atmosphere to better understand the weather patterns and figure out what chemical reactions happen in each layer. We could look for hotspots to see if there have been active volcanoes recently. We could even search for signs of past life and study the planet's geology. Now for another stormy place, this time on the outer reaches of the solar system. Uranus. When you get caught in a thunderstorm, it might be sticky and uncomfortable, but that's nothing compared to some of the storms in the rest of our solar system. And for the longest time, Uranus wasn't seen as particularly crazy in the storm department. That is, until 2014, when astronomers got a surprise. They found clusters of gigantic methane storms sweeping across the planet. Before that, storms on other planets were thought to be driven by energy from the sun. But the sun's energy just isn't strong enough on a planet as distant as Uranus. And as far as we know, there isn't any other source of energy to drive such huge storms. The only thing that scientists are pretty confident about is that the storms on Uranus start in the lower atmosphere, unlike sun-driven storms, which occur higher up. Beyond that, though, the actual cause remains a mystery. Maybe we're totally wrong about what's going on in the middle of Uranus. The atmosphere could be much more dynamic than it seems from the outside, generating heat that's powering these storms. And it could be a lot hotter in there than we think, too. It's possible there's an atmospheric layer trapping the heat inside the planet, making the upper atmosphere cooler and masking its true inner temperature. The secret may lie in how the different parts of the atmosphere interact. We just can't say for now. At the very least, these storms have taught us that there's a lot more to Uranus than meets the eye. Now we head out beyond the planets we know and love to the Kuiper Belt. The Kuiper Belt is a disk of frozen bits of water, methane, and ammonia. It starts out at the orbit of Neptune, 30 astronomical units from the sun, and keeps going to about 50 AU from the sun. But there's one thing about the Kuiper Belt that's a huge mystery. Once we get to 50 AU, the belt just stops. It ends all of a sudden, something astronomers call the Kuiper Cliff. This isn't easy to explain, but we have a few ideas. It could be that the belt really does continue, but the objects become so small that we can't see them. But this idea doesn't fit with what we know about how the solar system formed. If anything, because of the complex interactions of the outer planets' orbits, we'd actually expect objects to start getting larger again at that distance. A more exciting idea is that the objects may have been pulled away by the gravitational attraction of an as yet undiscovered planet. Such a planet, which would be the 9th planet in the solar system, could be the size of Earth or Mars. Sadly, though, it's tough to see anything that far out, so we might be waiting a while for that answer. So the Kuiper Belt is pretty far away, but there's one part of the solar system that's even more out there. The Oort cloud. We all have a picture in our minds of the solar system as a flat disk, but astronomers have hypothesized for a long time that the disk might have a spherical shell around it. This shell, the Oort cloud, is thought to be made up of icy rocks, water, methane, ethane, carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, and other nasty stuff, extending out as far as 2 light years from the sun. Why do we think it's a thing? Well, every so often we spot long-period comets, comets whose orbits take longer than 200 years, and when we trace back their paths, they seem to come from sources a long way out in every direction. Our mathematical models for how the solar system formed tell us the cloud should be out there too. As the mess of the early solar system collapsed into the disk we know today, we'd expect small icy objects to be thrown into an outer shell by the gravity of Jupiter and the other gas giants. But even if it makes sense for it to be there, we've never actually observed the Oort cloud. Being so far away with so little light, we just don't have the technology to see it. That means for the moment, we have no way of proving that it exists, or if it does, how big it is. As these mysteries show, we don't have to go far to find puzzles aplenty right on our own celestial doorstep. And really, these 5 mysteries are only the beginning.
Michael's right. We don't have to go far to find unsolved mysteries. Apparently they're everywhere. But that's a good thing. It means there's still a lot of awesome stuff out there to discover. And if people like you stay curious, we might end up solving some of these mysteries and taking them off this list one day.